It just took me way too long to find this t-shirt. I have way too many black t-shirts in here. But as you can see, it has something written on it, and you're gonna hear about it in a bit. Good morning and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Victor News Network. Yes, this is a shameless self-insert, and this is aimed at a marketing consultant friend of mine came up with. Well, this is an unstructured episode compared to the Warsaw report, so you will not see it segmented in geographical regions, although having looked at the news that I've gathered, is going to be like a third of the news articles that were usually in a SOFA report. I'm reiterating again that I'm doing all this thing alone, and so there are some limitations when it comes to this. So now, in order to hear from our sponsor, well, he's not exactly a proper sponsor, we're just mutually supporting each other. You can call him an exposure sponsor. And right now I'm talking about Matchbook Customs. They don't pay me anything to say this, even though they got me this t-shirt, but make of that what you wish. If by any chance you live in the UK and you are into Harley Davidsons, preferably live in the Cambridgeshire area, however, Matchbook Customs will serve all of the UK. By any chance to go on their website, you can find now their Facebook page right now on the screen. Their website is hbc.style. They're great people, and I'm supporting them to build a community around Harley Davidsons as they support me to spread the word about this. As you can see in this picture, with me and one of their works taken in 2020. Yes, that was during the pandemic. Any suggestions regarding videos or other means of communication and general stuff? It's accepted either via the comments that will be part of this video or by the email at thehonestjew1@gmail.com, one being digit one, or on Twitter/X at thehonestjew1, same as the email address. Links and the timestamps will be in the description. So, starting first, Business Insider. Russia's Kinzhals are frustrating Chinese analysts who want to find out how Beijing's hypersonic missiles might stack up against US battlefield defenses. Modern militaries have been looking to the war in Ukraine as a proving ground for advanced weapons, but observers in China are hoping to study Russia's use of hypersonic missiles, one of the most hyped up tools in Beijing's own arsenal, are signaling they won't learn much from Moscow. The Chinese defense magazines have, in the past year, been reporting on the Russian Kinzhal with great interest, analyzing its performance against US-provided Patriot systems and in the war in general. And for a good reason. The Kinzhal's appearance in Ukraine is Beijing's first opportunity to observe how such sophisticated weapons fare in battle against Western equipment. China hopes its own hypersonic missile, the Dongfeng, which one? There are about 14 Dongfengs in existence, will be game-changing in its capacity to take down US aircraft carriers. Yeah, good luck with that. But the Kinzhal, touted by the Kremlin as an unstoppable hypersonic weapon, is being reported by the West to have been thwarted by Patriot systems in order, or to have simply missed its targets. Well, it actually happened. It did get shot down, and it missed quite a lot of targets. So there is more and more evidence showing that what the US and Ukraine say on this matter is true. The Chinese defense analyst Yin Jie wrote in November in the Shanxi military magazine Ordnance Industry, Science and Technology. While such journals don't necessarily reflect views or intel from within the People's Liberation Army, state agencies must approve their publishers. Despite this, Yin issued a surprisingly critical review of how Russia uses the Kinzhal, otherwise known as the dagger, writing that the missile was unlikely to have a significant impact on the battlefield. That directly contradicts how Russia, a close ally of China, has portrayed the weapon as a pivotal munition for victory. A short-term hasty project. The Chinese analysts spelled out various ways which Russia had undermined its own missiles, such as how the Kinzhal has been fired and its availability. The Kinzhal, they concluded, just wasn't the star that Moscow made it out to be. Yin described the Kinzhal as an evolution of Russia's ground-launched Iskander missile that was rapidly completed in a short-term, hasty project that was forced to be launched as Western rivals put pressure on Moscow in the years before the war. This missile, which was developed based on the technical framework of the 1980s, may not have any amazing battlefield performance, the analyst added, although it's true, because the Kinzhal is just an air-launched Iskander with a modified rocket in order to go faster than the traditional Iskander. The Kinzhal's maneuverability, they wrote, cannot be compared with that of a real hypersonic missile. Well, that's because the real hypersonics aren't developed by the only military industrial complex competent to make such a thing, which is the USA, who know how to build scramjet engines capable of propelling projectiles and planes so fast in order to be considered hypersonic. Adding to its ballistic trajectory also made the Kinzhal susceptible to defense systems such as the Patriot. A similar view can be found in Showdown Between the Dagger and the Patriot in Ukraine, an analysis published by the prominent Beijing and Science defense journal Military Arms. The Kinzhal, this separate analysis said, was at best a marginal hypersonic missile. Although Russia calls it the Dagger a hypersonic missile, analysis from other countries generally believe that the so-called hypersonic Dagger missile is actually an air-launched version of the Iskander short-range tactical ballistic missile, it said. Well, there you go. An assessment aligns with what Western experts have said about the Kinzhal, that it's not a true hypersonic missile, in that it can reach hypersonic velocity but can't glide and maneuver effectively at such speeds. There you go, another extra reason why this isn't real hypersonic. The Dagger missile has more than enough ambition but not enough power, the July analysis said. The accuracy is unsatisfactory. In his November analysis, Yin blamed more than just a lack of sophistication in the Kinzhal, pointing to circumstances in the Russian military apparatus as a whole. Yin noted that Russia had stopped launching Kinzhals from its MiG-31s, choosing instead to use Su-34 jets, firing safely from outside the range of Ukraine's defenses. But the analysts wrote that the Su-34 was proving too sluggish to fire the Kinzhal at an optimal speed. Already slower than the MiG-31, the Su-34 was further weighed down by the heavy Kinzhal, Yin assessed. For the Kinzhal to be the most efficient, the launch aircraft has to move at high speeds and altitudes to give the missile a proper range boost. Therefore, after the aircraft is equipped with the Kh-47M2 Dagger, or Kinzhal in Russian, excessive and unrealistic expectations cannot be placed on its initial capabilities, the author wrote. They also criticized Russia's satellite system for guiding the missiles, saying it didn't have enough satellites for precision, and that's not really, we'll discuss this later. The accuracy is unsatisfactory, the analyst wrote. Yin then raised the issue of Russia simply not having enough Kinzhals, saying Western sanctions had hobbled Moscow's capacity to quickly manufacture the weapons, which limited how the missiles could be used. The Dagger was not produced and equipped in large quantities. After a year and a half of expenditure, there may be very few left in the inventory, they added. It can only be used to attack strategic locations. The mirrors findings in December from the Institute for the Study of War, a Washington, D.C. think tank, which cited Ukrainian intelligence saying Russia produced only 4 Kinzhals a month. I think clearly a lesson for China here is that they need massive inventories of weapons. Lyle Goldstein, the director of Asia engagement at the Washington, D.C. think tank Defense Priorities, told Business Insider, more than what they consider a military requirement. He and the RAND policy analyst Nathan Wechter have documented China's study of weapons in the Ukraine war via an article series published by The Diplomat. Their work includes an analysis of Yin's critique of the Kinzhal. China watches the Ukraine war closely. Goldstein said that he and Wechter had been tracking dozens of Chinese articles analyzing the Kinzhal, which indicated Beijing was deeply interested in its performance. It adds to evidence that China is watching this war extremely carefully, he said. Goldstein said that Russia had, in recent months, intensified attacks using the Kinzhal, and that Western observers would have to wait to see what Chinese experts follow these. But Goldstein said that if Chinese media was picking up on any hurdles that Moscow had faced with Western weaponry, Beijing's military was probably scrutinizing them as well, given China's close and dominant ties with Russia. What has been printed in Chinese defense magazines, he added, was only a hint of the true scope of Beijing's analysis and the lessons it was gleaning for a potential war with the US. I've always held that we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, Goldstein said. Well, on the last statement, they are partially right about this, but at the same time, the general conclusions from within the Chinese military are not exactly too far off from what they publish in those defense journals mentioned by the article. But overall, yeah, the Chinese are right. The Kinzhal has been as Russia does traditionally, has been overhyped as it is some sort of wonder weapon. Guess where this term came from? The more things change, the more they stay the same. And it's not just the Russians appealing to this wonder weapon ideology and overhyping of their technology, but it's also the Chinese doing it. Um, just because people over the world, especially those in the defense industry, don't talk too much about Chinese hardware, that doesn't mean it is greater. But when it comes to Russian hardware, it's just that now it's much more obvious looking at the performance in Ukraine. Uh, exactly how the hype they built upon using their propaganda. Of course, Russians are still excellent at propaganda, but as I said, Ru- Russian stuff simply does not measure up to the hype. That will also happen with the Chinese things, but just give them time. Yes, it's true that the Chinese are looking at the war in Ukraine in order to actually learn some lessons, and they definitely learn some lessons. The real danger is not just not just them analyzing the Kinzhal missile. It's everything else that is happening there. Uh, and this is an important aspect. But in order to delve deeper into the subject, we will have to go into a hypothetical scenario, which will be what if China goes to war against the USA or China and whatever allies it can scratch upon to join them? And what if they go against a war against the US or and especially the Pacific? Since well, leaving aside that would be a completely terrible idea because China without the rest of the world and especially without the West, it's a completely lost country. They're already having economic issues. When we will discuss more about such things later in the podcast. Uh, well, let's just say that by some miracle the Chinese can actually alleviate the destruction on their economy that will be incurred if they ever go to a war against the US and its allies, whether it is in the Pacific or in the West overall. If this war will play in the mainland, and it will definitely be played in the mainland, I'm pretty sure that the Chinese will definitely learn much more when it comes to drone warfare from the Ukrainians rather than what they have to learn from the Russians. The Russians, yeah, sure, you can learn things from them, but particularly learn things such as things that you should definitely not be doing in a war when you're fighting against a small force. Even though numerically, yes, the Ukrainians are smaller and the Russians still have the advantage, it's much more complicated in reality. Plus, at the same time, still, drones are what interests China more when it comes to the war in Ukraine. This is a point that has to be reiterated, and everybody learned this lesson. So several days ago, a company whose name I currently forget, but I'm going to write it when I'll find it again. Uh, several days ago, they just published an article that they managed to build a drone electric motor uh, which can actually make 1 megawatt of power, and that is huge. It's a company that's owned by the Radion Technologies Group. No, no, not Radion, the company that is owned by AMD, but Radion, the company that first gave us microwaves, and then they gave us a lot of missiles. Those are the guys. So overall, yeah, this is the thing. China can definitely dream about building hypersonics, and this is a point that has been made several times now all over the years, with the Chinese touting the rockets that they currently don't have because they're still in development, that they're apparently carrier killers. I wouldn't exactly say so. Um, sure, you can definitely destroy a carrier, and by a carrier I mean just the carrier, not the entire carrier strike group, which are almost a dozen ships, including a submarine, not only the carrier, with a saturation attack. Well, sure, if you got enough rockets to have a saturation attack, and you really have to focus on that. I'm not exactly sure if a saturation tag would be worth it for just one single carrier, considering that the carrier has its own defenses and it's also defended by every other ship that's uh, that's currently there. Not to mention that that in order to launch a saturation attack, you would have to fire it from a location, and it's a good idea to fire from a reasonably from a reasonably close distance. Not close, I mean distance what I assume will be the mainland of China to the sea. But I mean this is between the launchers. So, and what happens when you are firing this many missiles? It will be obvious. It will be seen visibly, but the most importantly, it will be seen by the satellites. And with the current technology that the US in particular possesses, if you shoot one of those missiles, not to mention if you shoot a dozen, it's going to be obvious instantly, and it will take at most 30 seconds until the carrier strike group finds out your location, and the aforementioned submarine will absolutely turn that area where you launched the missiles into a thin sheet of glass. And now speaking of the Russians continuing to mess up, another agency. Russian National Wealth Fund has no more euros in its accounts. The Russian Finance Ministry announced Wednesday that the National Wealth Fund has no more euros in its accounts. The ministry said it sold all reserves in European currency to cover the budget deficit at the end of 2023. In December 2023, part of the NWF funds in accounts with the Bank of Russia were sold, it said. The proceeds were credited to the federal budget in order to finance its deficit. As a result of these conversion operations, a zero balance was formed on the euro account in the Bank of Russia. Currently, the fund has only rubles, gold, and yuan. No rupees? Russia has long been fighting for de-dollarization of the global economy since Washington started weaponizing its national currency, using it as the main sanction tool. The National Wealth Fund abandoned investments in the dollar in 2021, the same year it sold all of its assets in US currency. In 2022, it also emptied its accounts in the British pound and Japanese yen. The Russian National Wealth Fund was created in 2008 as a safety cushion that allows the state to compensate for the loss of oil and gas revenues in the event of a sharp drop in prices. Yeah, the news is that the situation is much worse than it is presented. Sure, it doesn't have any more euros, but considering that they have only rubles, gold, and yuan, well, sure they do. They have yuan, but still, I'm not exactly sure that China, in the current circumstance, prefers to trade in yuan, even if it is technically their own currency. Rubles will not be bought by exactly anybody because nobody wants to have rubles. And for a simple reason, just like what happened with Argentina, but at least with Argentina you can blame it on mismanagement. When it comes to the Russian ruble, what you see right now, when you look when you get at what exchange rate is, well, in reality, if you go on the ground in Russia, the exchange rate could be 2 or even 3 times uh, bigger. So that's the exchange rate on the street. Yeah, sure, it's the black market, but the official exchange rate has could have never been trusted. Uh, not even during the days of the Soviet Union, and not even after the Soviet Union fell. Because pretty much this is one lesson that the West hasn't learned about Russia, and definitely not about China or any communist country or formerly communist country that has existed or still exists in the world. They always lie about statistics. Uh, whether Russians lied about statistics or more like the USSR, but even currently Russia still does lie in their statistics. They do it for posturing, while the Chinese, by comparison, they do it in order to not lose face to the rest of the world. Although the reasons made it different, the point still stands. And just to get back to the point with Russia and its national wealth, who would have thought carrying a war, and especially a war that is so chaotic and played with all sorts of issues, could actually be expensive? Who would have thought about that? And it's not just expensive from the perspective that yes, to wage a war is an expensive ordeal. Uh, if anybody inclined to numbers uh, can just simply do a simple calculation. How much does it cost to deploy something that could be considered really slim, like a brigade of airborne troops. Say, for example, the VDV. Well, you have hundreds of people that you have to pay them because they're not because yeah they fight for the country, but at the same time they're not going to fight for the country if you don't provide them the incentive, which is mostly financial. And sure, now you got the people, and then you got to equip them with weapons. Weapons cost a lot. And the last statistic, going back to another example, which is public information, um, uh, every U.S. Army soldier has about $17,000 of hardware when it comes to equipment. So that means the weapons, the uniform, the magazines, the the vest, the helmet, and everything else that the U.S. soldier needs. Sure, when it comes to Russia, is definitely much smaller than that, but still it's expensive. And to further take the point home, now you have the people and you've equipped them. How do you exactly deploy them? Well, in order to deploy them, you need to use a plane because they're airborne troops, they're not landborne troops. Because if they were landborne troops, uh, they will not need a plane. And when you get to the plane, it gets a bit more complicated because the plane in itself, in order to build and maintain, it's expensive. Even if you inherited some Ilyushin plane from the days of the Soviet Union, that still in itself cost a few millions of dollars to build back then. And in order to maintain it, in order to not actually disintegrate by the time it takes the troops to that location, well, you need maintenance crew for that, and the maintenance crew has to be set somewhere. You also need an airfield. Airfields are also expensive, even if it's a dirt track. Uh, that still costs money to build. You also need the fuel for it, but let's just say that in the case of Russia, they don't exactly have a problem with sourcing the fuel. Although when it comes to sourcing the gas, they had problems for the population this winter. So going down in an accounting style, number by number. Just getting the people cost this much. Getting the hardware for the troops cost this much. Uh, the plane itself that costs this much, then you have the maintenance for the plane that costs that much, then you have the fuel. It gets pretty expensive, and we're talking here in this example just about one single unit. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of units deployed in Russia of all sorts, shapes, and sizes. And yeah, when you wage a war on that scale, the Germans learned this aspect pretty fast, and the Russians haven't, especially when you wage a war on a front that is so big. Kind reminder, when the special military operation began in Ukraine, the size of the front was a third larger than the operational front that used to be back in World War II when Operation Barbarossa began. And when it comes to deployment and organization and logistics, well, we've all seen the footage of tanks advancing faster than fuel trucks could keep up with. Soldiers would end up just simply leaving the tanks on the side when they ran out of fuel or ammunition, and they just simply either surrendered, killed themselves, or ran back to their lines uh, as fast as they could. And to reiterate the point made earlier about equipping troops, losing a tank is not exactly really cheap. Even the cheapest tank that Russia builds today, or Russia used to build, that still costs at least $1 million. And when you have this many examples, the costs keep on racking up higher and higher. Uh, with the losses of the Russian economy when the West decided to simply cut off the gas supply that came from Russia, which is a good thing. Uh, and not to mention sanctions. Well, you add one and the other, and you get the situation that you can see right now. Um and don't be surprised that that situation in Russia really is bad. Sure, the mainstream media does not talk a lot about this, but if you know where to look, you can definitely find uh, all the information that you need about how bad things in Russia are. It's just that they don't talk about it. But just because they don't talk about it doesn't mean that it isn't there. While I agree, so sanctions are something which gain a benefit to the which gain a benefit against your enemy. It takes time. It, it takes time, sure, because there is such a thing as inertia within an economy, even within the Russian economy. Uh, but things will get there at some point, and it's just that we're not seeing the catastrophe. We're not seeing the catastrophe yet, but the catastrophe is already there, which we just can't see simply because the Russians uh, will never put in public such economic data. The disaster is there. We're just not going to know how bad it was until most likely when the Russians will either inevitably lose this war, or if the war ends up being a Korea-style deadlock with the DMZ and everything. Although although with the DMZ that would actually not be preferable, because compared to North Korea, Russia is a completely different beast, and the powers that be, who knows who will be leading in that moment. I'm pretty sure they will not prefer to freeze such a conflict and against such an enemy the way the war in Korea was frozen. Speaking of the things that Russia keeps on doing, The Independent, Nancy Pelosi under fire for suggesting Russia is behind pro-Palestine protests. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is under fire after she suggested some pro-Palestinian protesters are connected to Russia, We have to think about what we're doing, and what we have to do is try to stop the suffering in Gaza. But for them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message, said in an interview on CNN State of the Union on Sunday morning. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. The comments came after she was asked if she feared that President Joe Biden will lose the electoral support of young voters at the polls over his vocal support for Israel and the nation's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the war on Gaza. In a follow-up, she was asked if she thought that some pro-Palestinian protests were Russian plans. I don't think they're planned, she responded. I think some financing should be investigated, and I want to ask the FBI to investigate that. There is no reported evidence that Russia is linked to pro-Palestinian protests. Mr. Pelosi's comments attracted criticism, with Nihad Awad, head of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, describing her remarks as delusional. Representative Pelosi's claim that some of the Americans protesting for a Gaza ceasefire are working with Vladimir Putin sounds delusional, and her call for the FBI to investigate those protesters without any evidence is downright authoritarian, he said. Her comments once again show the negative impact of decades of dehumanization of Palestinian people by those supporting Israeli apartheid. Instead of baselessly smearing those Americans as Russian collaborators, former Speaker Pelosi and other political leaders should respect the will of the American people by calling for an end to the Netanyahu government's genocidal war on the people of Gaza, the statement continued. She was also criticized by journalist and activist George Monbiot. If Nancy Pelosi can't understand why people are calling for a ceasefire, she shouldn't be in office, he said on X. Of course, because all the important information you find on Twitter these days. A spokesperson for Ms. Pelosi said the former House Speaker supported and defended the right to peaceful protest, but was acknowledging the history of foreign adversaries meddling in American politics to affect elections. Speaker Pelosi has always supported and defended the right of all Americans to make their views known through peaceful protest. Informed by 3 decades on House Intelligence Committee, Speaker Pelosi was acutely aware of how foreign adversaries meddle in American politics to sow division and impact our elections, as she wants to see further investigation ahead of the 2024 election, the spokesperson said. Ms. Pelosi's comments mark the first time a prominent U.S. lawmaker has accused Russia's leader of backing U.S. protesters calling for a ceasefire. Protests demanding a ceasefire in Gaza have recently occurred across the U.S., including near airports and bridges in New York City and Los Angeles, vigils outside the White House, and marches in Washington. Demonstrators have also interrupted President Biden's speeches and events, as well as events attended by Ms. Pelosi. The protests have been organized by a range of human rights, Jewish, and anti-war activist groups. The UN has also demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, where more than 26,000 Palestinians have died, but Washington has vetoed resolutions for such calls in the United Nations Security Council, saying it will let Palestinian Islamist group Hamas, which governs Gaza, regroup and rebuild. A November 2023 poll found that the majority of the US public supports a ceasefire in Gaza, where most of the congressional representatives do not. Yeah, the majority of the US public supports a ceasefire in Gaza, but guess what? It's not the opinion of the US population does not matter on this topic, simply put. And there are a few things to discuss in this point. Well, while the vast majority of the protesters will definitely not be Russian plants, uh, this can be blamed on Ms. Pelosi's age, which is almost deceased. They're not exactly Russian plants, although they do represent to some extent Russian interests. But the Palestinians and all their advocates, especially those who call for a ceasefire, when let's remember back on the 7th of October, it was not the Israelis that started it, it was the Palestinians that started it, and oh boy, the way they started it. When you go door to door, in order to kill people in their bed, so that means men, women, children, toddlers, and also kidnap them and torture them. Uh, what exactly did you expect was going to happen? The main interest when it comes to situation with the Palestinians, they're much less Russia's, but they're more Iran's, and since Russia doesn't have as many allies as it used to be, uh, it relies most on Iran. To remind us, Palestinians had quite a long relationship with Russia back when it was known as the Soviet Union. Where do you think all the PLO has been taught to fight, and who exactly supported them back then against the struggle of the same state, because it's still a state of Israel. This circumstance, what will be the most important thing is you don't put the ABI on these people in order to find where the Russian plants are. It'll be a better idea to find them where the Iranian plants are, because those are much more numerous. And this entire discussion overall has already gotten pretty toxic, uh, because because simply you look at the situation, and when you look at the pro-Palestinian advocates, the vast majority of them are useful idiots. That's what we already know, because this is what they're manipulated to know. They haven't been given the information intentionally so about what the real situation is. And then you have people like this woman from the Council of American Islamic Relations saying that Ms. Pelosi is delusional, which is partly true, but for the wrong reason. But at the same time, saying that, well, what negative impacts of decades of dehumanization of the Palestinian people, and also in Israel there's an apartheid. At the same time, the American political leaders should respect the will of the American people by calling an end to the government and a ceasefire. Sure, uh, the only people a ceasefire would advantage right now would be Hamas, because Hamas have been blown into oblivion to, in the past few months, as they completely deserved. It, it's not exactly difficult to see this. It's a simple matter of fact. Actions have consequences. If you start resorting to terrorism to this level, well, which is not exactly something new, but the way it was done by Hamas, what exactly did you expect? Uh, Uh, it'll be the same way as you're a scrawny kid uh, poking a hibernating bear in the cave and not expecting the bear to wake up and absolutely maul you to death. That's exactly what Hamas did. So not only it's utter hypocrisy to say that. Mm, to say that, well, the Palestinian people have been dehumanized, but the Palestinian people are at the same time the vast majority of them who actually voted for Hamas to be governing Gaza. Plus, you have also other Islamist interests in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. Sure, even if apparently in the West Bank you have Fatah, but Fatah technically no longer exists, since the vast majority of all the political power plays are done by Hamas, and those are done by Hamas not only with the approval but with the support of the people there. It's not exactly difficult if you're interested to see what sort of people the Palestinians in Gaza are. Try to find footage from the first days after the 7th of October, you will definitely find available on YouTube right now. But I already have such videos taken downloaded off YouTube because they will be very important in the future. You, right after the Hamas invasion began in Israel and they started genociding people in the real sense, uh, a lot of people went on the streets and started looking at the sky and saying Allahu Akbar, the praise be God. Also, our soldiers are destroying the Zionist oppressors. Then you have also other recordings which were actually Mossad intercepts of phone calls where you had Hamas militants that went into those towns and villages to shut up absolutely everybody uh, who, who lived in them, calling their parents back in Gaza. And telling them, Mom and Dad, you're gonna be so proud of me. I shot up this many Jews, and the parents are absolutely jubilant at the fact that their kid did such things. These are the people. How dare people like Niharawad simply say, well, they were dehumanized. We should definitely consider in the next few years a change in definition of what can be considered human, or more like who can be considered human, and what things do you have to do in order to no longer fit under that category. To put it simply. There are still a lot of people blowing smoke up Palestinians' ass. Most importantly, still the UN, because the UN, with the exception of the Security Council, if you look at the UN in itself, especially the UN Assembly, where they vote on all the resolutions that are presented there. You just simply have to look at how many resolutions were voted against Israel in the past decade or so. You have about, last time I checked, that which was 2 years ago, there were about 6,600 and change resolutions dedicated to Israel, and in the vast majority of cases, uh, the majority vote comes either from Islamic countries or more like Muslim countries, uh, and if they're not coming from Muslim countries, the rest of the vote, that the least of the majority, comes from countries that support said Muslim countries, and here I'm talking about South Africa, North Korea, Iran, and from time to time China as well. Although although China stopped doing such things because the Chinese realized that it's better to do business with Israel rather than publicly berate them uh, in the forum of the United Nations, just like the rest of the countries are doing. And the UN has been doing this for a long time. The the UN Assembly as an institution, the vast majority of it is profoundly anti-Israel, and there is a significant amount of money funneled both from Iran, but also Qatar, which is again tied with Iran, but at the same time Russia as well. Uh, in order to portray Israel as it being the bad country, the genocidal country these days, the country dehumanizing the Palestinians, uh, and of course this absolute monarchy with calling Israel an apartheid state. Well, in what sort of apartheid state uh, you can go as a Muslim not only enter not only enter on the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is completely okay, because you have security guards that will ask you if you're Muslim or not there, and they will and surprisingly they will let you in the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex if you are a Muslim, but they will not allow you if you're anything else. However, a Muslim person can easily go to the Wailing Wall where you have all those Jews praying at the wall and putting prayers in between the cracks on the wall, and have absolutely no problems with this. Excuse me, but have we suddenly forgotten the definition of what an apartheid state is? And if we are to delve deeper into what sort of people the Palestinians are, we just have to go deeper into history to also understand about this conflict. Things like why, for example, the Egyptians have blocked the border so tight uh, in the south of Gaza that they will not let almost anybody through. Well, for a simple reason. While the Egyptians at surface level they support the Palestinians because it will look really bad. It will really look bad on the Muslim world to not be on their side. In private, things are completely different. The Egyptians do not forget things like how in Jordan when the Palestinian refugees appeared in 1968, it almost led to a civil war because the Palestinians did not like how Jordan was governed with a king and with a parliament. The Egyptians do not forget the fact that in 1974, if I'm right, when Lebanon took in a lot of Palestinian refugees, a civil war actually began not many years after that, uh, because the Palestinians simply wanted to take over power themselves. But you're looking to the situation today, the the Lebanon is still in a shit pile of a situation, and there's absolutely nothing that can be done in order to change it. Uh, up until that point when they took in the Palestinian refugees out of apparently you can call it uh, Christian goodness because Lebanon was still majority Christian back then. It didn't take long for the demographics to turn against them, which is one of the reasons why the civil war began, and the civil war was brutal. And what happens right now? Uh, Especially with Iran being a bigger player. There's actually singular factions who each fight for themselves, and then you have much bigger factions, not just the successors of the Palestinian refugees from back then, but also things like Hezbollah, who were directly funded by Iran, essentially trampling over everybody else in that country. And Warsaw, both Hezbollah and the Palestinian refugees have successfully managed to manipulate the rest of the naive Lebanese population in order to believe that when Israel goes to war against Lebanon, they go against Lebanon because they apparently have an issue with the Lebanese people as a whole. Even the even though Israel never had an issue with the Lebanese Christians themselves, but they had an issue with things like Shiite Islamists back in 2006. But at the same time, the same thing happens right now with the numerous troop deployment that's happening at the northern border of Israel. Things have gotten so bad to that point, and the interests behind institutions like Hezbollah are way too big in order to still continue to pretend that they can be negotiated with. With these people, you do not negotiate. It's not exactly anything complicated if the if you If you want to know what the real game is, you just simply have to read the holy books and interpret them uh, like a radical Muslim would, and then and then you must understand another important aspect. While you can consider the radical Muslim to be the one that resorts to that there's also killing the person. The vast majority of the moderates are the ones supporting the radicals by just simply looking at them or giving them the weapon or giving them the shelter or generally do anything but the said act of war. But speaking of war, we're going back to Ukraine right now. Al Jazeera. Ukraine says that it covers 40 billion arms corruption scheme. Only 40 million? The security service of Ukraine says 5 charged over plot to embezzle funds earmarked to buy 100,000 mortar shells. Employees from a Ukrainian arms firm conspired with the Ministry of Defense officials to embezzle almost $40 million earmarked to buy 100,000 mortar shells for the war with Russia, my apology. The Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, has reported. The SBU said late Saturday that 5 people have been charged with 1 person detained while trying to cross the Ukrainian border. If found guilty, they face up to 12 years in prison. The announcement, which was confirmed by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, will have a deep impact on a country beleaguered by Russia's nearly 2-year-old invasion. The SBU said an investigation had exposed officials of the Ministry of Defense and managers of arms supplier Lviv Arsenal, who stole nearly 1.5 billion hryvnias, so that's $40 million, in the purchase of shells. According to the investigation, former and current high-ranking officials of the Ministry of Defense and heads of affiliated companies are involved in the embezzlement, the SBU said. The deal involved the purchase of 100,000 mortar shells for the military, with a contract secured in August 2022 and payment made in advance. But no arms were ever provided, the SBU statement said, with some funds then moved to other foreign accounts. 5 people have been given notices of suspicion, the first stage of Ukrainian legal proceedings, both in the ministry and the arms supplier, according to the Security Services statement. One suspect, the SBU said, was detained while trying to cross the Ukrainian border. Officials accused of participating in the scheme include the current and former heads of the Defense Ministry's Department of Military and Technical Policy, the development of armaments and military equipment, as well as the head of Lviv Arsenal. According to Ukraine's Prosecutor General, the stolen funds have been seized and will be returned to the defense budget. Corruption within Kyiv's military has been a thorny issue, both as it tries to maintain wartime public morale and present its case to join the European Union. Last September, Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov was dismissed amid various corruption cases. Russia strikes wide swaths of Ukraine. The announcement came as Russia launched drone and missile attacks hitting both civilians and critical infrastructure across Ukraine, Kyiv's Air Force said on Sunday. The Air Force said Moscow attacked the central Poltava region with 2 ballistic missiles fired from its Iskander ballistic missile system. It also launched 3 surface-to-air missiles over the Donetsk region in the east. In the southeast Zaporizhia region, Governor Yuri Malashko said an infrastructure site had been hit by a drone attack. Philip Ronin, governor of the Poltava region, wrote on Telegram that the attack there hit an industrial site in the city of Kremenchuk, igniting a fire. There were no preliminary reports of casualties, Kyiv said. Leaving aside this last part with the most recent development in the war in Ukraine, during every war that ever existed on this planet, there have been grifts going on like these. This one has been discovered because it was way too egregious. 100,000 mortar shells. In reality, there aren't that many, but they're still. But if you have them, they're still important. However, that company did absolutely nothing, which is why it was caught. And it was caught because of course, while Ukraine receives the money through different channels from the West, the distribution is still done by the ministries, and in this case, since we're talking about a war, it's going to be done by the MOD. And of course, in a truly Eastern European fashion, some guys in the MOD decided, well, we kind of need some money ourselves. Who knows what's going to happen? Let's just see who we're going to find to collaborate in order to in order to get our piece of this cake. So that's how they ended up with this company, Lviv Arsenal, and and the company was paid to do something there, and they did absolutely nothing, which is why they ended up getting caught. Because 100,000 rounds in a real wartime scenario doesn't mean much, but in a war like this, it means something. And that was exactly their mistake. If they were paid for to make 100,000 shells, even though I can't exactly tell you because I have no information about this, how much would the price of a mortar shell cost? Uh, but I'm pretty sure, as it generally happens with government acquisitions, even during the state of war, they're always overvalued. Uh, if they would have made at least say 60,000 or 70,000 shows from that order of 100,000, and then simply say, well, we ran out of money, we've had issues with manufacturing, we couldn't source whatever materials we required, or we don't have enough people, so it's going to take a bit longer. We would have never heard about this. But to drive the point home across, during every war, there have been grifts going on. I'm going to put in the description a video made by Laserpig, who discusses about tank development in France during World War One. That information provided there by the historian, uh, he shows not only what happened during the war, but also what happened before the war. And the situation is itself was absolutely hilarious. The sheer political and financial chaos that was happening back then, especially because uh, just as it is possibly the case right now in Ukraine as well, each general uh, has its own interest and has its own companies that they favor, just like how French generals. Uh, from World War One had their interests as well, even though the situation in their country during World War One, if you are to remember, was absolutely horrendous. Millions of people died, and they still wouldn't let go of the grifts. And even if they let go of the grifts, and to actually focus on building the tank, even though if it wasn't proven technology, I agree with that point. Because, again, we have to think of it in the context of the time that it was going on. Even though it may not have been successful, well, yeah, but to not decide on a design, and then if you don't decide on a design, you have a company that already has a privately made design, and one general thinks that, well, the design is at least viable, but the general doesn't get the money from the government. And then the general at some point gets the money from the government, but then gets the funding pool by the government to give to another general for another reason, because said general is a friend with a bureaucrat who decides who has how the funds get allocated. But even if he gets the funds allocated, well, he gives the money to the said factory in order to build the product, and the company, the employees start striking. Well, because of course it's France, what do you expect? And then the funds get embezzled as well. And all of these were happening again, because this is a really important point to make, in a situation exponentially worse than what Ukraine finds itself in right now. And this scenario is also something that's not unique either. I'll give another example, which is much more popular and much more documented, since it's again in the recent-ish history. Uh, look again at tank development in World War II, especially in Germany. Uh, where you had political plays between the Austrian painter and Ferdinand Porsche. When you had that was one of the reasons why, for example, the Tiger tank ended up being built by Henschel, But Ferdinand Porsche still relied on getting a contract directly dedicated to his company, of course, because why wouldn't you? And that's the reason why the tank destroyer known as the Elephant came into being. Then you had also the interests of Himmler and Goering. Examples like these are omnipresent. Uh, and in order to stick to examples from World War II and the size of the grifts that have been happening, and in order to not take not exactly take a side to say that they were the bad guys, let me just give you another example from the Allied side of how the grifts were going on. And here I'm going to talk about the the production of the Boeing B-17 bomber in the USA. So ever since the Boeing B-17 started being built in about 1936 or 1937, the sticker price in $1940 for a single Boeing B-17 was $250,000, and that price was before the war went on. Of course, the the U.S. Air Force at that time said, "Well, this is way too expensive. We're going to buy a few because there's still new technology, but we're not going to buy as many." When the war began, suddenly the objection about the prices disappeared, and just to get a scale of how big the grift on this plane was. Well, I did say that it was that in 1940 US dollars it cost $250,000 to build one single Boeing B-17 bomber. That translates in 2024 dollars to $5.41 million per single plane, and over 12,000 planes were purchased by by U.S. Air Force and the RAF, but the vast majority of its usage still being done by the U.S. Air Force. Uh, the math is pretty simple. It leads to a total cost for this one single plane is $65 billion, $65 billion in today's money, and the US used over 120 types of planes during World War II. Again, this is not something unique. And sure, while you can compare that, well, at least Boeing built the planes compared to this company that did not build the motor shells it was contracted to do. Eh, yes, but the way corruption and grifting is done in the West. Is done by over-evaluating what you're actually making, but grossly over-evaluating what you're actually making. And in the wartime scenario, the government doesn't have better option than you than find a way to pay you, but at least you delivered the product. Well, the mistake that again the Ukrainian company did was to not deliver the product while also having it overvalued, though, which drives the point home across. The way grifting is done in a Eastern European fashion, you don't overvalue it as much as you do, but as much as Western companies do. That's what I wanted to say initially. But then what you do is you try to save costs at every other level in order to still deliver some sort of final product while it still works to some extent as it was intended. Well, as much as possibilities allow, but at the same time you do it through relationships like these. And but this is something that is obvious done by every country on the globe where you find corruption, and you will find corruption everywhere, just because in the Western world discussions are not carried out about the corruption that's going on, doesn't mean it's not happening. It's something that's part of human nature. us as individuals, we are sinful by nature. We are designed imperfect, and that's okay. I'm not making a moralistic argument that you shouldn't do this, but if you decide to do this, because again we're flawed humans, and whether we do it intentionally or not, uh, again, even if you do it with good intentions, the road to hell is always paved with good intentions. Uh, at least do not do it as obviously as these guys did. Now, moving on to I'm from the government and I'm here to help. In The Guardian, disposable vapes to be banned in UK as part of drive to curb youth vaping. Plans to make vaping less appealing, also to include restricting fruity flavors and introducing plain packaging. Ministers are to ban disposable vapes as part of a UK-wide drive to curb youth vaping. The government is also seeking to make vaping less appealing to children by restricting sweet and fruity flavors, introducing plain packaging, and making displays less visible in shops under newly announced powers. These changes are expected to come into effect towards the end of the year or early 2025. Announcing the move, Rishi Sunak said, as any parent or teacher knows, one of the most worrying trends at the moment is the rise in vaping among children, and so we must act before it becomes endemic. Yeah, sure. He added, as a Prime Minister, I have an obligation to do what I think is the right thing for our country in the long term. That is why I am taking bold action to ban disposable vapes, which have driven the rise in youth vaping, and bring forward new powers to restrict vape flavors, to introduce plain packaging, and change how vapes are displayed in shops. The move forms part of a wider response to a public consultation on smoking and vaping, which has resulted in plans for some of the world's toughest anti-smoking measures, first revealed by The Guardian, including a ban on selling tobacco products to anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009. Although vaping can be a useful tool in helping adult smokers to quit, doctors are concerned about the unknown long-term health impact of vaping on young people and their developing respiratory systems, as well as nicotine addiction, which can cause anxiety, trouble concentrating, and headaches during withdrawal. Recent figures show the number of children using vapes in the past 3 years has tripled, with 9% of 11 to 15-year-olds now using vapes. The proportion of 11 to 17-year-old vapers using disposables has increased almost ninefold in the past 2 years. The ban will also reduce the major environmental impact of disposables, since 5 million vapes are thrown away each week, up from 1.3 million last year. The Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health welcomed the announcement, which follows its campaign launched in June to ban disposable e-cigarettes and introduce marketing restrictions. Dr. Mike McKean, a vice president for policy at the college, said bold actions was always needed to curb youth vaping, and banning disposable is a meaningful step in the right direction. He told The Guardian that the success of the changes would depend on the detail and close monitoring of its impact on the behavior of children and smokers. I anticipate this will make a difference, but the size of the difference we don't know yet, he said. I don't think this area of policy is done and dusted. It's one we watch and see if it needs tweaking and further development. This is a good bill and we should back it, but watch it very carefully. Despite recent research suggesting banning disposables could discourage the use of e-cigarettes among people who are trying to quit smoking, he felt it was the right policy. There are many other ways of supporting adults to come off cigarette smoking, including reusable vapes. I just don't buy this argument. I can understand people raising concerns, but I will challenge them back and say they're not putting children and young people first. Sunak's plans to ban the sale of tobacco products to anyone born or after the 1st of January 2009 look set to be met with opposition from his own benches. Rebels include a former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who told the Times the move was a wholly unconservative policy, and you know what? She's right. The government is hoping to introduce legislation that will ban disposable vapes as soon as possible by using existing environmental protection laws. The ban will also be implemented in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland through devolved legislation. Ministers will have to pass the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, included in the King's Speech, to obtain powers to restrict flavors, introduce plain packaging, and change how vapes are displayed in shops. The speed of its passage depends on other outstanding legislation and will be followed by a 6-month implementation period to give retailers time to adjust. To crack down on underage sales, the government will also bring in fines for shops in England areas that sell vapes illegally to children, including giving trading standards officers powers to hand out on-the-spot fines. Vaping alternatives such as nicotine pouches will also be allowed for children. Of the 25,000 responses from parents, teachers, healthcare professionals, and the public to the government's public consultation, 70% they were in favor of a disposable vape ban, although support was mixed for flavor restrictions. Dame Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England, said, "When I asked a couple of years ago about all aspects of their health and well-being, I was shocked and concerned to hear from children as young as 12 who told me that vaping was normalized among their peers, even on school premises. This announcement will help tackle the issue that I know many children and parents will be extremely relieved." The UK Vaping Industry Association said that while it welcomed on-the-spot powers for enforcement officers to deal with underage sales, it was dismayed by the decision, which said it could discourage smokers from using vapes to quit. A spokesperson said the answer to youth vaping doesn't lie in counterproductive bans or even restrictions, but rather in effective and proactive enforcement, which is woefully lacking, of the law which states that it is illegal for vapes to be sold to minors. The UK VIA is presenting a scheme based on an industry-wide consultation to parliamentarians in February that will set out ways to make it harder for rogue traders to sell to minors. Hold on, this is a much bigger discussion. Let me just smoke a completely 100% non-vaping product right now. When it comes to the issues related to kids, when the government wants to impose tyrannical measures upon its population, one of the things they hide behind are the children. And let me tell you something. Since I moved to this country first time in 2018, I did work at one point with adolescents. In that certain circumstance, they were between ages 14 to 18, and they were still attending school. And then let me tell you something. The things I heard from them that happened in those schools, and by those schools I mean British public schools. My mistake. I'm just saying that underage vaping is a problem that's much lower on the scale of other issues. And let me just say specifically, when you hear of drug transactions, and I don't mean and I don't mean I don't mean just weed, but I'm also saying about other much harder drugs, uh, which are traded in schools by the same adolescents who also vape. I'm saying that that is a much bigger problem. The other significant problem, going slightly away from the kids, is that vapes in this country did benefit from a preferential value-added tax compared to other products. Currently in the UK, as it was several years ago, the VAT is 20%, but alternatives to smoking and also alternatives that help people to quit smoking. One of which are vapes, but the others are nicotine patches and nicotine pouches. So nicotine pouches are exactly the same as those Swedish pouches, which are not bigger than this, and then you put the other gum right here. Those ones end up being, because of VAT, much cheaper to consume, and and in time, because there's also a Chinese interest into this. The meme with God knows what they put in vape liquid concocted in some random lab in China. That's not exactly far from reality. God knows what exactly the aromas are made of, and also knowing the Chinese, God knows what other things they also mix in that vape liquid, because it's not just propylene glycol or vegetable glycol plus some concentrated nicotine. I'm not exactly sure. Not exactly sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if other things were to be discovered as part of those liquids. But this is also twofold. Since lithium batteries became so much cheaper, I actually agree with the environmental argument here. And you just have to walk in a city in this country. You will find quite a lot of of the so-called disposable vapes, which have lithium batteries in them. In the moment that they're used, they're just simply thrown aside, and they're not thrown aside in the bin. They're thrown aside on the street, and you find them everywhere. In hedgerows or bushes, or just on the sidewalk itself. So yeah, from that point of view, not to mention that as these contain volatile batteries, yes, they do possess an environmental hazard in themselves. However, I would say that that's a bigger problem, which if the government wanted to do something about it, it could have done something just at that level to simply discourage the sale of disposable vapes. The argument made here by the Prime Minister and also other people is the youths that are the problem. But going aside to this, let's also make here the medical argument. From their perspective, they're kind of right. While smoking at that age isn't a good thing, because smoking does stunt your mental development, especially during the age of puberty. Plus it also stunts your physical development, and nicotine bears most of the blame. On the other side, vaping is indeed more dangerous because everybody who vaped can tell you this. But for those who did not vape and do not want to touch the subject, I will explain it to you. The nicotine that you get in your body through smoking, and the nicotine that's atomized and goes in your body through those glycol vapors, they're two completely different things. The concentration is not only much higher in the vapor, but also much easier to access by the body. With and that's a clear reason why for people just like what I used to do, but for people who mix the vape liquid themselves, when you get the nicotine, when you get the small nicotine bottles, it definitely says there, do not let it touch your body because you will have problems. But even if it doesn't touch your body, and you have even a small spill of the already mixed liquid on your body, it still gets absorbed. Even if the mixture in itself is already diluted, it can still generate problems. However, even though these are true, I'm just going to make a reminder here about something that apparently has been forgotten, if it has been forgotten by the leftists intentionally, but it has been forgotten even by the people on the right. Personal responsibility. For an adolescent after the age of 12, the wants to start smoking, or wants to start vaping, or wants to start smoking weed. They aren't dumb people in order to not realize that has an effect on them. We've all had it. Everybody who smoked their first cigarette or their first pipe, in my case, are aware of this. The nicotine makes you dizzy. The smoke causes nausea. And if you start vaping, and especially if you start vaping mixes with high concentrations of nicotine, you start getting really dizzy, and you can even get a lot of headaches. It's obvious that it's having effects on your body. So again, it's the responsibility of the individual, yes, even if that individual is an adolescent, to inform himself about these effects, and actually have a look at such things. Yes, I understand, and everybody understands that adolescence is a pretty shitty phase. There are a lot of changes happening at the level of your body and at the level of your mind, and overall your development. The world that we live in also doesn't help the way it is. But again, if you decided to poison your body this way, then that's entirely up to you. All of us bear the consequences of our own actions. But the reason why the government can make these arguments, we should ban smoking because it apparently causes cancer. We should ban vaping because it causes all sorts of problems. The only reason why the government can make such an argument is because the people again are at fault for this. And referring specifically to the case of the UK, the people are at fault for accepting social health care known as the NHS after World War II. Yeah, sure. It does sound good on paper, but not only you have a myriad of financial arguments why that system is a bad idea, but then you also have these other issues when you don't exactly have private healthcare infrastructure. Private healthcare infrastructure has been either outright banned or very discouraged until very recently in the UK. The government still has the monopoly on healthcare, but the government also funding the said healthcare system. Of course, they're going to encroach on things like these. It's pretty obvious that this is what's happening. But one of the reasons why I chose this article is that this is not going to happen just in the UK. It's going to happen in other places, in other places in Europe, because it's not like if the UK, when they got out of the EU will not get ideas coming. That's pretty simple. Mm, because the mentality at the level of the elites, whether we talk about the elites in London, or the elites in each country in the EU, or the political class, either at the parliament or at Brussels, they don't exactly think differently about these things. And one of the reasons is also ventriloquism. Have you seen by any chance in this article somebody making a not just a counter argument to present other issues? No, there aren't, because this is one of the strategies when you push when you try to push such legislation, is that you surround yourself people and institutions who essentially parrot what you're saying, and parrot in the direction that you want to go with a certain piece of legislation. The leftists know how to do this really well, and even though Rishi Sunak and the party he is the head of is called the Conservatives or the Tories, since the days of David Cameron, the Conservatives started behaving more and more by comparison that they will be considered social democrats in continental Europe. But now with Rishi Sunak, they're definitely social democrats. Rather than being at least social democrats with a conservative leaning. But remaining to the UK, Express. UK universities accused of favouring foreign students over better qualified UK applicants. Accusations arise against top UK universities alleging a bias towards admitting foreign students with lower exam scores over better qualified UK applicants. Britain's top universities are paying millions of pounds to recruit foreign students with poor exam results while denying places to better qualified UK applicants, it is claimed. Scholars from overseas can allegedly buy their way with a handful of C-grade GCSEs. The backdoor routes are so lucrative that middlemen are pocketing a fortune to hunt down wealthy pupils who pay fees up to 4 times higher than those from the UK. These students now take a third of all places, with 689,000 in 2022. The highest number come from China. Private go-betweens take around 20% of the fees paid by a first-year student and sign the recruits up to pathway courses. The Russell Group of top universities said foundation year programs have long proved to be effective pathways to university for both international and UK students. Well, here is also another case related to the previous one. Most universities in this country are public, and if they're not wholly public, they receive money from the government. And one of the reasons why this ended up happening is because true, due to Brexit, suddenly a myriad of students from the EU that could come to university in the UK could no longer come to university, and that leaves quite a big vacuum in the balance sheets of a lot of universities because those EU students, yeah, the vast majority of them would not have the nearly £10,000 per year required to pay for this. But they would do just like what I did. They would apply for student financing from the government, and at least the university was guaranteed to get a constant stream of money in one way or another, uh, as they were meant to. But once post-Brexit, you shut off this cash stream from the universities. The universities suddenly scrambled to get other clients because the universities, even though they're public, they function with a sort of private mindset from this point of view. They still need to make money in the end. So that's essentially what they did. They went on a recruitment spree. A lot of them signed a lot of contracts with the student recruitment companies like these ones that are mentioned in order to get students, because students from overseas pay a lot more than home students or EU students that managed to register to the EU settlement scheme before Brexit happened, just as it is my case. So the difference is pretty clear. Let me just say, in the university that I'm attending, my yearly fees are £9,250. That's public information. You can find it anywhere. But fees for students who are internationals, they're all starting this year, or actually starting from the 2023-2024 academic year, they are almost £15,000, and you see where the difference is right here. And since we're speaking of public institutions, just like anywhere, there are also the grifts associated to this. As this article says, private recruitment businesses who bring students from China in order to get a diploma here and then go back home with the said diploma, but they'll go back home with a diploma from a prestigious British university. But it will still end up costing them at the very least £45,000 per student at the end of their tertiary education. That's assuming they don't go into grad or postgrad. But still, I'm saying from inside the public universities, there have also been a lot of people that have been employed in order to exactly support this thing. And it's not just, and yeah, this article says that the highest number of students come from China. Do you want to know from the ground what the second number of students comes from? They come from India. They used to come from India in the past as well, but in the past the competition for places was much higher because of course the preference was to take either home students from the UK or the EU, and and the space was limited for internationals, even though behind the scenes you will get a preference, especially because there was also even back then they used to pay higher fees. The fees up until 2020 for international students was almost £12,000 per year. However, even there, in Romanian, this term of employing acquaintances in public institutions because you owe something in one way or another is called sinecurism. You give them a sinecură and you give them a position because yeah, this is pretty much you're positioning and parking people in places in order to reward them. But this is exactly what happened. Comparing pre-Brexit, this university pre-Brexit and post-Brexit, I can tell you that the population of the university has increased significantly, but also staffing has increased significantly as well, to the point that that recently built buildings, not even 10 years ago, now are too crowded and they do not fit the number of staff which is apparently required. And from information that I heard from inside, they're apparently also understaffed. So there's not a sufficient number of people who work within the admin in order to support not only all the international students, because you have to give them a completely different level of support, especially when it comes to English language. They're not exaggerating. The article is not exaggerating that international students, especially those that come from Asia, come with shockingly low levels of English. Levels of English which would have been absolutely intolerable pre-Brexit if you came to a UK university from the EU. But in this case, they kind of close an eye and look the other way because they're still interested in the money. And students that come from Asia, they do those just as the ones that go and do MBAs in the US at either Harvard or Stanford or any other Ivy League or God knows what, just any university. They come with a lot of money. They are not poor people. The vast majority of them are not poor people. Sure, it is still a significant financial effort, but at the level of those societies, just as it is still right now to some extent in Eastern Europe, although this thing has started disappearing slowly once people started waking up at how absolutely degenerate Western universities are. Uh, still in Asia, if you are for example an Indian or a Chinese, but you have a degree from a university in the UK or a university from the US, so less so Canada. It used to be the case in Canada as well, but not so much. You're automatically perceived much better than the rest. To drive this point home, I'll just simply put it like this. We take one individual. Let's call him Michael. Michael comes from New Delhi, India. If Michael from New Delhi, India chooses to attend an Indian university, I don't know, let's say the New Delhi University of Engineering, and if another Michael and if the same Michael would attend something like not like let's just say not even MIT, because MIT we're already aiming too high, but if he goes to RIT, for example, so that will be the Rochester Institute of Technology, which is still a pretty good engineering university. If Michael would apply for the same position, Michael with the US diploma would have disproportionately higher chances of getting the said job or getting much better opportunities in the long term rather than Michael with a diploma from an Indian university. Even if said teaching from that Indian university, sure, it may not be exactly at the same level as that university from the US or the UK, but it will still be decent enough. It will still be good enough. It doesn't have to be exceptional. But this is one of the no, you can't exactly say one of the issues. It was one of the situations when, when it comes to Asian societies, the perception that if you've been educated in the West, you're automatically better than everybody else. It used to be the same, as I've said, it used to be the same thing in Europe, although in Europe, this paradigm that has gotten shaken up significantly thanks to the situation that has been happening in the past decade or so, with all sorts of moronic ideas coming from Western universities and seeping their way into societies in Eastern Europe, particularly cultural Marxism. But uh, but speaking of Marxist and stuff, we're going to go to another sort of Marxist. BBC. What is South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ? The International Court of Justice has been asked to consider whether Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Israel rejects the allegations as baseless. South Africa brought the case to the court. What is the International Court of Justice? Now, the ICJ is the top court of the United Nations, based in The Hague, in the Netherlands. It was established after World War II to settle disputes between states. It also gives advisory visions on legal matters, which is what it is being asked to do with Israel. Unlike the International Criminal Court, the ICJ cannot prosecute individuals for crime of the utmost severity, such as genocide. So it's essentially the court where you do posturing like this. It's not the court that actually does things like the ICC. But its options carry weight with the UN and other international institutions. So there's essentially a circle jerk between the UN and the ICJ. Okay. What is genocide and what is the case against Israel? South Africa alleges Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians following Hamas's 7 October attack. Hundreds of Hamas gunmen crossed from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel, killing 1,300 people, mainly civilians, and taking about 240 hostages back to Gaza. Since Israel launched this military campaign against Hamas in response, more than 26,000 people, mainly women and children, have been killed in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Okay. Evidence submitted by South Africa claims acts of omissions by Israel are genocidal in character because they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian national, racial, and ethnical group. Oh, I didn't know that Palestinians are now a race. Okay, we're going forward. This describes what Israel is actively doing, such as carrying out airstrikes, and what it is allegedly failing to do, such as, according to South Africa, preventing harm to civilians. The case also highlights Israel public rhetoric, including comments from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as evidence of genocidal intent. Under international law, genocide is defined as committing one of the acts with the intention to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Those acts are killing or causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part, the imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. How has Israel responded to genocide allegations? Israel fiercely rejected South Africa's claim. Good. Mr. Netanyahu said, "It is not we who have to come to perpetrate genocide, it is Hamas. It will murder all of us if it could." Fact check true. In contrast, the IDF is acting as morally as possible. Fact check true. Israel's military says it takes a raft of measures to avoid civilian casualties. Fact check true. For 20 years now. These have included airdropping flyers warning of imminent attacks. True. Calling civilians' phones to urgent to leave targeted buildings. That's true as well. Aborting some strikes when civilians are in the way. Fact check true. I would also add here, when in the case a certain building gets bombed, Israel is the only country on the planet that does something called roof knocking. They first launch a bomb, which is only explosive, meant to shake the building, which serves as a warning that in a very short time a real bomb will appear. And they do this only when they are absolutely sure that whatever individuals or groups that they're hunting in that building, they are already there. So they go through multiple levels of warning, specifically in order to prevent as much as possible civilian casualties. The Israel government has repeatedly stated its intention is to destroy Hamas, not the Palestinian people. What has the court ruled, and when there will be the final verdict? The court issued what is called emergency measures on 26th of January. This was a hearing to rule on a number of interim steps which South Africa had asked it to take against Israel. The key request was for the court to order Israel to immediately halt operations in Gaza, but the court did not uphold this. Of course. However, it did instruct Israel to prevent its military from committing acts which might be considered genocidal, to prevent and punish incitement to genocide, and to enable humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. The court also ruled that it had a legal right to proceed with the genocide case. A final verdict could take several years. The rulings are legally binding on countries which formally accept the ICJ. These include Israel and South Africa, but in practice, unenforceable by the court. Of course, a political declaration, also known as fake news. In 2022, the ICJ ordered Russia to immediately suspend military operations in Ukraine, but the order was ignored, of course. Why has South Africa brought the case? South Africa has been highly critical of Israel's military operations in Gaza. As a signatory of the UN's 1948 Genocide Convention, it has an obligation to act, it says. The governing African National Congress also has a long history of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. It sees parallels with its struggle against apartheid, a policy of racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the white minority government in South Africa against the country's black majority until the first democratic elections in 1994. The country condemned the 7 October attacks and called for the release of the hostages. Our opposition to the ongoing slaughter of the people of Gaza has driven us as a country to approach the ICJ, said President Cyril Ramaphosa. As a people who once tasted the bitter fruit of dispossession, discrimination, racism, and state-sponsored violence, we are clear that we will stand on the right side of history. Well, hold on. Well, I find it absolutely ironic that South Africa is essentially forwarding genocide accusations to a country that also states is practicing apartheid, even though it is not actually practicing apartheid. Just like rolling back to what I said at the second article since the start of this video. It's also ironic that the country where necklacing is practiced has suddenly opinions about what is considered genocide. And this is not the first time in recent history when South Africa has done this. South Africa also launched at the ICJ back in 2015 a genocide accusation against the United Arab Emirates when and Saudi Arabia at the same time when the war in Yemen began. And you know what the reason was? The reason was that the United Arab Emirates in particular bought years before quite a lot of self-propelled artillery systems from South Africa. They're really good self-propelled artillery systems. But what the South Africans didn't like is that as weapons of war, they were used in a war. And that's how the genocide accusation ended up on the desk of the UN. It did not go far at all, which is the reason why you're not going. Well, why the only thing that you find about this in mainstream media is an article from the BBC from 2015, and that's it. You're not going to find anything else on this topic. But it's also the hypocrisy of it. So South Africa has an issue with the way Israel carries out operations in Gaza. When the current war is something that Hamas in Gaza began. Well, at the same time, they don't have an opinion about the war in Ukraine, which I started earlier. And it's much more brutal, and they actually have much more supporting evidence as to the Russians committing a genocide there, and much more things actually fitting to the criteria approved by the UN. So it's not my own criteria, it's not their criteria, it's the criteria allegedly agreed upon by everybody, that it's a genocide there. We remember the bombing of the theater in Mariupol. We remember Bucha. We remember the deportation of thousands of kids into Russia, and God knows what happened with them, because the Russians will definitely not say what happened with them. And here I'm saying children that were kidnapped and deported within Russia, and they were moved to either other families or legit camps, God knows where. But South Africa will not do this. You know why? Because essentially South Africa is in the pockets of Russia. For the minority watching this who may not remember, Nelson Mandela, the founder of the African National Congress, was a terrorist, which was financed and trained by the KGB and the Spetsnaz, along with all of his lackeys that committed terrorism in South Africa up until the point when the real apartheid regime ended in 1994. There's also another thing, because with South Africans being so hostile towards Israel, even though in instances when Israel actually did extend the olive branch to the South Africans, like for example in 2017 or 2018, if I remember correctly, so South Africa was going through a serious drought that was affecting its agricultural sector. Government, also led by Benjamin Netanyahu back then, contacted the South African government and told them that we can assist you with our technology and our labor and our labor in order to dig wells deep enough and build the irrigation infrastructure in order to prevent such a thing from happening again. We know these things because we've been digging for decades, wells down hundreds of meters below the ground, because yeah, we don't exactly have water. We live in the middle of the desert. Even though we live next to the coast, we also don't have the energy resources necessary to have ginormous desalination plants, for example, what the GCC countries have. Israel doesn't have the oil that they do in order to desalinate millions of liters of water constantly. So what did the South Africans do back then? Well, they simply refused, and they kept on pointing this aspect forward. Well, we're not going to work with a country that practices an apartheid state. It's still hilarious, the way things are going. To drive this point home across, uh, Israel is not an apartheid state. South Africa, along with especially directed by Russia, and when it comes to Russia, again, we made a connection to Iran and other Muslim countries who are part of the UN, who formed that cartel that pretty much always has a condemnation about Israel for any reason or no reason whatsoever. This is the game that's played. This is just political posturing, and even as this article says, the ACJ is pretty much the judicial institution of political declarations. Yeah, we politically declare that Russia has to stop invading Ukraine because they committed genocide. Yeah, nothing happened. Just like nothing will happen now, uh, especially because the Israelis actually have the justification to continue the war. But going now to a more relaxed subject. We're talking now about techno-optimism and its consequences. BBC. It hasn't delivered. The spectacular failure of self-checkout technology. Unstaffed tills were supposed to revolutionize shopping. Now both retailers and customers are bagging many self-checkout kiosks. It's a common sight at many retail stores. A queue of people wanting to use a self-checkout kiosk, doing their best to remain patient as a lone store worker attends to multiple malfunctioning machines. The frustration mounts while a dozen darkened, roped-off, and cashierless tills sit in the background. For shoppers, self-checkout was supposed to provide convenience and speed. Retailers hoped it would usher in a new age of cost savings. They're thinking, why pay 6 employees when you could pay one to oversee customers at self-service registers as they do their own labor of scanning and bagging for free? While self-checkout technology has its theoretical selling points for both consumers and businesses, it mostly isn't living up to expectations. Customers are still queuing. They need store employees to help clear kiosk errors or to check for their identifications for age-restricted items. Stores still need to have workers on hand to help them and to service the machines. The technology is in some cases more trouble than it's worth. It hasn't delivered on anything that it promises, says Christopher Andrews, associate professor at the Chair of Sociology at Drew University in the US, and author of The Overworld Consumer, Self-Checkouts, Supermarkets, and the Do-It-Yourself Economy. Stores saw this as the next frontier. If they could get the consumer to think that self-checkout was the preferable way to shop, then they could cut labor costs. But they're finding out that people need help doing it or that they'll steal stuff. They ended up realizing that they're not saving money, they're losing money. Unexpected item in a bagging area. Many retail companies have invested millions, if not billions of dollars in self-checkout technology, which Andrew says was first developed during the 1980s and started appearing in stores in the 1990s. They're not exactly cheap to get into stores. Some experts estimate a full kiosk system can run six figures. Despite the cost to install them, many retailers are reversing course on the tech. Target, for instance, is restricting the number of items self-checkout customers can purchase at one time. Walmart has removed some self-checkout kiosks in certain stores to deter theft. In the UK, supermarket chain Booths has also cut down on the number of self-service kiosks in its stores as customers say they're slow and unreliable. Dollar General, one of the fastest growing retailers in the US, is also rethinking its strategy. In 2022, the discount chain leaned heavily into the self-checkout technology. It's not uncommon to see only one or two employees staffing an entire Dollar General store in some areas. Despite the investment, they are now planning to increase the number of employees in stores, and in particular, the checkout area, according to the company's CEO, Todd Vasos. We had relied and started to rely too much this year on self-checkout in our stores, he said during the company's Q3 2023 earnings call on the 7th of December 2023. We should be using self-checkout as a secondary checkout device, not a primary. Dollar General did not respond to the BBC's request to comment. Some data shows retailers utilizing self-checkout technology have loss rates more than twice the industry average. Some retailers cite theft as a motivator for ditching the unstaffed tills. Customers may be more willing to simply swipe merchandise when using a self-service kiosk than they are when face-to-face with a human cashier. Some data shows retailers utilizing self-checkout technology have loss rates more than twice the industry average. In addition to shrink concerns, experts say another failure of self-checkout technology is that in many cases, it simply doesn't meet the cost savings businesses hope for. Just as Dollar General appears poised to add more employees to its checkout areas, presumably increasing staffing costs, other companies have done the same. Despite self-checkout kiosks becoming ubiquitous during the past decade or so, the US still has more than 3.3 million cashiers working around the nation, according to data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. Humans or machines? Customers want this technology to work and welcomed it with open arms. However, years later, they're still queuing for tills, waiting for store staff assistance with errors or age checks, and searching high and low for the PLU code or the Walla Walla street onions they're trying to purchase. In a 2021 survey of 1,000 American shoppers, 60% of consumers say they prefer to use self-checkout over a staff checkout aisle when given a choice, yet 67% of consumers have had the technology fail while trying to use it. The bottom line is businesses want to cut costs and shoppers want to get in and out of a store. If self-checkout isn't the answer, they'll find another avenue. It's not that self-checkout technology is good or bad per se, but if we try to self-checkout and realize we're not benefiting from it, we might switch back to not using it, said Amit Kumar, an assistant professor of marketing and psychology at the University of Texas, who studies consumer behavior and decision making. It appears to be happening in many cases as customers' frustrations with technologies persist. But Andrew says that while stores may change up on the strategies, as seen with Dollar General and others, many large retail chains are likely to keep kiosks in stores due to sunk costs. They spend billions putting it in stores and are hoping they can still get the public to buy into it, he says. Retailers may continue to rely on technology, but many aren't putting their farm fresh eggs in the self-checkout basket. Instead, they're increasingly giving customers the option to choose between human and machine. For the customers that do choose to do their labor themselves, there's one thing Andrews believes won't change: however ubiquitous the technology is and however much consumers get used to using the kiosks, shoppers are likely to find themselves disappointed and frustrated most of the time. It was a part of a larger experiment in retail in trying to socialize people into using it, he says. Simply, customers hate it. So, so yeah, on this topic with self-checkout machines, yeah, mostly they're right. As I've seen in the places where I generally shop at, self-checkout machines have become more prevalent than what they used to be. Uh, and yes, all the arguments are correct. And I'm saying this from the perspective of a person that uses self-checkout. The reason why I use self-checkout is because in the current living arrangement that I find myself in, well, I simply don't have enough space in the fridge to put too much stuff. So what I have to do is I can essentially buy more products in an entire cart. With one of the big sizes, I can only put as much as it fits into a large military backpack, and that's it. But that's about the only argument when self-checkout actually works. And even then, it doesn't exactly work like that. You still have the issue when and this is a really good point that this article makes. When when the technology doesn't work, for example, when the scales are when the scales aren't calibrated properly, you could find yourself you can find yourself buying say a kilo of bananas, but if the scale feels that the bananas are not exactly 1 kilo, then or if there is a mismatch between the scale that you're putting the bananas on and the ones and the scale where you put the rest of your purchases on, then it'll start give you an error, and then you have to call for one of the assistants to clear the error for you. The other issue is, yeah, indeed, we restricted items, and in the UK in particular, this is particularly obvious. If, for example, you buy energy drinks or you buy alcohol, or if you buy all sorts of medicine like aspirin or cough syrup or other things, then in that moment you're screwed because you need an authorization for all of them. Uh, sure, you can ask for the authorization once you've already put all things there. But things are even more ridiculous. Say if you have a bottle of alcohol and that one has a security tag on it. Well, you can't remove the security tag yourself. You have to pay for it. You have to pay for your purchases, and then you go to another person who sits at another place in order to remove the said security tag off your bottle. Another ridiculous thing. Yeah, if you getting back to this example. In the UK, if you want to buy yourself, for example, if you want to stock up on things that you don't want to purchase all too often, say that if you want to buy two boxes of paracetamol and 2 boxes of aspirins, you can't do that uh, because sales are restricted to either buy two packets of paracetamol or to buy 2 packets of aspirin. You can't do all of them on the same transaction. So that means again, if you buy yourself a mixture of these, then you have to do multiple transactions. You have to do your initial transactions, leave the medicine on the side, put all the things that you've already bought in your backpack, then you do another transaction because you have to clear the scales. You can't have anything left on the scales because the system will not let you continue with another purchase. Do that one as well, and then pay for that. Get another authorization, and then put your stuff in the backpack, and only then you can finally leave. So yeah, from this point of view, They're right, and this technology is very expensive. And where do you think that these expenses go? It's not like it's not like the retail companies do it from the goodness of their hearts. No, they're going to up the prices for the rest of the consumers, the vast majority of the consumers who do not need who do not need such things. And let's be honest here. Quite a lot of people, when they go to supermarkets, they go to buy quite a lot of stuff. Not everybody lives the same way as I do. When you don't have the physical space in the house and in the fridge to buy more. So when you go and do your either weekly or twice monthly purchases, you're going to fill up a cart with things. And yes, for one good example is in Asda, you're not going to find these self-checkout machines, but for example in Tesco, you're going to find the big checkout machines where you're technically meant to go to pretty much leave the cart on the side. You take out each purchase, you put them on a much bigger scale. You still go for the same from the same debacle for all sorts of restricted items. And only then, once you're done, you take them off the scale, and then you put them back into your cart. You can see where the problem is compared to the normal traditional cashier till that we've all been accustomed to. It's definitely much more cumbersome, much more prone to errors, and also much more frustrating to the end user than it is. Well, thankfully, in the case of this Tesco supermarket that I mentioned, there are still quite a lot of cashier tools which are handled by people, which is a great thing. But the fact that the said big tills still exist and those cost significantly more than the small self-checkout tills which have become more prevalent, that is still an issue, and that is dishonest to the vast majority of the customers who do not use this, to pass the cost to them, because the companies essentially have been sold by tech grifters this idea that, yeah, we'll self checkout and do it yourself is going to actually enhance it's going to enhance the user experience, and it's going to make things easier, and it's going to make things cheaper from the company. Well, it hasn't. It's just that costs have been moved from one place to another. Instead of paying instead of paying a person the £11 an hour to handle a till, you're paying much more right now. Not getting rid of that employee, you're paying hundreds of thousands of pounds up front to buy, for example, to buy, as this article says, a four self-checkout pack cost you several hundreds of thousands of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever. Yeah, it makes things easier for some people, but those people are the slim minority. The vast majority of people are not in that part of the group. But things are the way they are. Actions have consequences. Again, kind of much this. Well, what one has to do is to outright refuse to use the self-checkout. Go to the handle tills. Do not take me as an example. Still use a normal human, and the businesses at some point will get the idea that these have been a bad idea, and they will learn the lesson because they're obligated to learn this lesson. Otherwise, they're going to lose customers, and that's going to hurt them a lot more in the longer term. To not fall into the trap of such tech grifters in the future, because they'll definitely exist in the future in another way. Now, sticking to Airstrip 1, Sky News. British citizens should be trained and equipped to fight in a potential war with Russia, military chief says. Well, this is pretty hilarious. General Sir Patrick Sanders has warned members of the British public they may have to be called up to fight in the event of a war because the military is too small. Well, I wonder why. British citizens should be trained and equipped to fight in a potential war with Russia, as Moscow plans on defeating our system and way of life, the head of the British Army has said. General Sir Patrick Sanders, the outgoing Chief of General Staff, said increasing army numbers in preparation for a potential conflict will need to be a whole-of-nation undertaking. The comments, first reported by the Daily Telegraph, are being read as a warning that British men and women should be ready for a call-up to the armed forces if NATO goes to war with Vladimir Putin. It comes after Defense Secretary Grant Shapps said in a speech last week that we are moving from a post-war to pre-war world, and the UK must ensure its entire defense ecosystem is ready to defend its homeland. But Downing Street ruled out any move towards a conscription model, saying that army service would remain voluntary. Sir Patrick has been a vocal critic of cuts to troop numbers and military spending. In his speech at the International Armoured Vehicles Conference in West London, he said the UK must urgently expand the size of the army to around 120,000 men within 3 years, up from around 74,000 now. But he said this is not enough, and training and equipping a citizen army must follow. He pointed to this happening across Europe, telling the audience, our friends in Eastern and Northern Europe who feel the proximity of the Russian threat more acutely are already acting prudently, laying the foundations for national mobilization. Not really. As the chairman of the NATO military committee warned just last week, and as the Swedish government has done, taking preparatory steps to enable placing our societies on a war footing when needed are now not merely desirable but essential. Sir Patrick added, we are not immune, and as the pre-war generation, we must similarly prepare. That is a whole-of-nation undertaking. Ukraine brutally illustrates that regular armies start wars, citizen armies win them. Sir Patrick added that Ukraine was currently the principal pressure point on a fragile world order that our enemies wish to dismantle. He continued, the war in Ukraine is not merely about the black soil of the Donbass, nor the re-establishment of Russian Empire. It's about defeating our system and way of life politically, psychologically, and symbolically. How to respond as the pre-war generation will reverberate through history. Ukrainian bravery is buying time, for now. Sir Patrick said that our predecessors stumbled into the most ghastly of wars after failing to perceive the implications of the so-called July crisis of 1914, referring to a series of diplomatic and military escalations leading to the outbreak of the First World War. We cannot afford to make the same mistake today, he added. Sir Patrick will be replaced as CGS in June by General Sir Rolly Walker, an announcement that followed reports he was being forced out in response to his outspoken comments. Right, getting back now from this sudden interruption of the neighbors cooking, Tobias Ellwood, a former defense minister who has served alongside Sir Patrick, said the military chief should be listened to carefully. Well, what's coming over the horizon should shock us. It should worry us that we are not prepared, he told Sky News. The MP for Bournemouth East said that following decades of post-Cold War peace, there was a growing sense of authoritarian states could exploit our timidity, perhaps our reluctance to really put fires out, pointing to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sir Patrick Sanders is saying, prepare for what's coming over the horizon. There is a 1939 feel to the world right now, he said. These authoritarian states are rearming. There's a risk awareness about the West in wanting to deal with that, and our global institutions, such as the United Nations, aren't able to hold these Arab nations to account. Mr. Elwood went on to say the army was overstretched, in part because of issues to do with pay and accommodation. He said the army, as well as the navy, was about half the size of what it should be, while the RAF was lacking the equipment it needs. Warnings about the shrinking size of the army have also been surrounded by former military general Lord Dannatt, who told the Times the numbers had reduced from 102,000 in 2006 to 74,000 today and were still falling fast. He drew parallels with the 1930s when the woeful state of the UK's armed forces failed to deter the Russian painter, saying there was a serious danger of history repeating itself. Speaking to Sky News about the comments, Mr. Shapps insisted the size of the army would not dip below 73,000 under the Conservatives' watch, even as he resisted Lord Dannatt's calls to up the defence budget. The government is currently spending about 2% of GDP on defence, but some want to see it rise to 3%. The government's target is 2.5%, but Mr. Schaaf told Sky News on Sunday that we're not there yet. This is also going to be another quite long discussion. Uh, yeah, this is going to be the title of this first episode of the Victor News Network. You reap what you sow. In the Western world, the Western, and especially Western societies, when they can no longer distinguish men from women, and then other people see humans as elevated animals who want nothing more but fulfilling their carnal desires, which is, by the way, fun fact, a violation of the first commandment because it's considered self-worship. Also, a violation of the second commandment because you turn sex and social status into an idol. Current society is perceived by many as not something worth fighting for across the entire political spectrum. And here I bring you a kind reminder that perception is reality. The second thing is that men in any country on this planet need well, what men need is something to work for, and another thing is something to fight for. And when it comes to the argument of something to work for, with the discriminatory practices that have been prevalent been in the West for so many years, with a broken social contract broken by the baby boomer generation, the lack of intergenerational transfer of knowledge. Again, getting back to the broken social contract, the demonization of men because it's toxic masculinity or things like that. The current general societal chaos. If the men perceive that the country they live in is not worth fighting for, they may sure on the longer side and from a old thought perspective, it's inexcusable, but at the same time, you cannot exactly blame them because it's not just them, it's a lot of people who think like that. And on the topic of the second thing men need, because here we're going to talk about men. If any country ends up at the level where the women also have to fight, then the said country has serious issues. And by women having to fight, I mean women needing to get conscripted. So I'm talking here something worse than what was USSR in the 1940s. Men generally, over the course of history, fought for three things. So those were family, faith, and country. Where exactly is the faith right now in the vast majority of the Western world? Here, I'm not exactly to taking sides or argumenting which uh, which religious denomination you're a part of. It doesn't matter here whether we talk about Catholics in Italy or Protestants in Germany or the other Catholic or the other so-called Catholics in France or the Anglicans here in the UK or Presbyterians uh, in the USA. That one, at least in the main line, has already been subverted more or less in order to not only go way too far from from the standards of Christianity, but also resorting sometimes to outright heretical thought. On the second part, family. What families are we exactly talking about here? Going back to the baby boomers, the baby boomers didn't give two shits about what the previous generations, their parents, did for them. Sure, they weren't perfect. They also had their degenerate streak during the interwar period, but when the need arose to fight, they did. Even though one of the reasons why the degenerate streak happened was because they experienced World War I, and and in the current context, with the vast majority of the families uh, getting divorced, the vast majority of divorces being initiated by women, the absolute lack of consideration what effects divorces have upon children and their development. you see where all of this is going. And then last one, but the third one is the country. Mm, Here, just as I've said earlier, when you as a country and you as a society begin to swallow well, what's essentially KGB propaganda, and by that I mean active meropриятия or active measures, as Yuri Bezmenov puts it, when you start to intentionally break apart the society by creating all sorts of minority groups. It doesn't matter if they're minority groups of a racial nature or ideological nature or of a sexual nature, as in these cases. Worse so you as a government taking aside for a gross minority of people, but pushing their ideas forward as being the new normal. You suddenly alienate the entire society. If what this general says is true, and I'm going to talk about this slightly later, but let's just say that if what this general says is true and it actually ends up being a war, yeah, a lot of people will run away. But you know why they run away? It's not because they don't believe in the country. It's because they don't feel it's worth to fight for it. No one can exactly blame them for thinking like that. They've got to the point where I think that's the case. And both for men and women, but here I'm talking specifically about the men, because men are the ones who are society builders. Let's be honest here. Without men, current societies wouldn't have existed. Doesn't matter what country we're talking about on the planet. And I will believe that women can build a society in the moment when I'm going to see a traditional male field. Like, for example, I want to see the logging industry, instead of being 97% men, or sewage workers to be instead of 98% men, to be at least 60% women. I'll believe that the society will be built by women when those things will change, and they will not change. There is an African saying that a child who is not embraced by a tribe will at some point burn it down in order to feel its warmth. And this has happened several times on the African continent, and it's not exactly a long shot to consider that if the trends would continue the way they are, well, and thankfully overall they're not, they may happen the same in the West. That's also the reason why on the Ukraine-Russia conflict you have so many people, especially in the Anglosphere, uh, unironically pro-Russians, tankies, or currently flankies as well. Flankies being the sort of people who unironically think that the Russian Air Force is worse than them. You can't exactly blame them. But sure, they've also been blinded by the Russian propaganda. But leaving aside the ocean of useful idiots, when it comes to the rest of the people, the current societies they live in are so toxic and are so geared against them. You don't need to do much in order to sway their opinion. In order to believe that something different is automatically better. You don't. Russia is from a lot of perspectives much worse than the West is, but it's pretty obvious if you look in the statistics. The divorce rates in Russia are worse than in Italy. They're about 70% in the first 5 years of marriage. The men themselves drink to death, so they end up dying 10 years earlier than the women. The women are the way they are. The society is the way it is. The abortion rate is something incomparable to the rest of the Western world. Doesn't matter what that's where you gotta find. It's difficult to find a country that's an outlier in the Western world to at least compare to the abortion rate in Russia. The generalized hypocrisy, the things. But for those who are interested to see how the real Russia is, the information is already out there. if by any chance you don't know, and if you know other people who don't know, but still insist on being unironically tankies, what I suggest is you go look for the three-part series made by Luciano Freedom Alternative. Russia is not great. And back to people who wouldn't believe in their own country, the vast majority of the said tankies and pro-Russians, when they lived in the perceived toxic world they do and the toxic context that they do, you don't even need to send them somewhere in order to look, in order to see that things are different. You just have to convince them that things are different, and then you already won them over. You already won them over. Sure, sure. That's a very stupid thing to do from their perspective. But at the same time, can you really blame them for wanting something different when the current system when the current system is not only perceived but leaving aside the perception for a lot of points of view, it is really worse. It is really worse and is not exactly conducive to the general health of of the greater society and the country as a whole. Sure, it's absolutely utopian to believe that that oh yeah, once a single country can be entirely unified against a common evil, that has never happened, and that is impossible no matter what country we take on the planet at any point in time, or at any conflict it found itself against. But in the current circumstance, again, it's you still need at least you don't even need a majority. Don't even need a majority of the society or the country. You need something called the critical mass. The critical mass of people. The said minority of radicals. The same on something similar to what Iran did when it went when it went through the Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Revolution, when it was done in Iran, it was done with about 10% of the population. But those 10% of the population, they were really committed. And as you can see, even though things have been shaking violently within Iran, the Islamists are still in control. They're still in control because they still have at least they're surely not 10%, but they still have at least 10%, at least 10% true 10% truly radical population who would go who will go to the greatest extent in order to preserve the system they fought for. You don't have in a lot of countries in the West you don't have that. Uh, the UK doesn't have that. The US thankfully has that in the southern states, which is why which is why the US will definitely not have issues surviving a so-called societal collapse. But in the UK you don't have that population that the US has because uh, because yeah, through a lot of reasons, those sort of people cannot be fostered, cannot be grown here. They could have been grown at some point, but it's no longer the case. It is no longer the case especially when this country, from an economic and societal point of view, is switching into believing that in this country you have London and then the rest. And when you focus entirely on on a single city, and when you do everything for them and let the rest be damned, you can't exactly blame the rest who have been left on the side for not believing in the said great cause of the nation or in the said country with a capital C. Times of Israel. Israel shows 10% of UNRWA workers in Gaza have ties to terror groups. Report. Wall Street Journal says document alleges around 1,200 Gaza employees of UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees have connection with either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israeli intelligence assesses that some 10% of all UNRWA employees in Gaza have ties to terror organizations, in addition to at least 12 employees it says were involved in the October 7 terror onslaught in southern Israel, according to a new report. The Wall Street Journal said Monday that Intel Jerusalem shared with the U.S. indicated that roughly 12,000 Gazan employees of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, some 1,200, have ties with either Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The report further stated that around 50% of the UN's agency employees in Gaza have at least one close relative with ties to the terror groups. The Associated Press said it saw in an Israeli document alleging that at least 190 UNRWA workers were themselves Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives without providing evidence. It was not clear whether it was the same document. Doesn't matter. The latest accusation prompted UNRWA to announce on Friday that it had fired several employees over the unspecified accusations. Despite that move, since the announcement, many donors, including the US, Germany, Britain, Italy, Australia, and Finland, have suspended funding to the agency pending an investigation. A dossier provided to the Wall Street Journal by the US government on Monday examined the involvement of UNRWA employees in the October 7 terror assault, in which thousands of Hamas-led terrorists burst into Israel from Gaza, slaughtering some 1,200 people and seizing 253 hostages. According to the dossier, a UNRWA school counselor from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza was suspected of working with his son to abduct a woman from Israel, while a social worker from the central Gaza city of Nuseirat was accused of helping snatch a dead Israeli soldier to Gaza. A third UNRWA employee was said by the New York Times to have taken part in the massacre at the kibbutz where 97 people died, apparently kibbutz Be'eri, which was ravaged in October 7 in the Hamas-led attack. One other worker was said to have been tracked to the site of the Supernova music festival near Reim, where 260 people were slaughtered, while others coordinated logistics and procured weapons ahead of and on October 7th. According to the Reuters news agency, two of the alleged Hamas operatives cited in the dossier are described as eliminated, having been killed by Israeli forces. A 12th Palestinian, whose name and picture are provided, is said to have no faction membership and to have infiltrated Israel on October 7 independently as masses joined the terrorists raiding Israeli communities. Also on the list of the 12 men are UNRWA teacher accused of arming himself with an anti-tank rocket, and another teacher accused of filming a hostage, and the manager of a shop at an UNRWA school accused of opening a war room for Islamic Jihad. Speaking to the Wall Street Journal, a senior Israeli government official said UNRWA's problem is not just a few bad apples involved in the October 7 massacre. The institution as a whole is a haven for Hamas radical strategy. Fact check true. The accusations against UNRWA are the latest in a long line of Israeli complaints about the UN agency, such as that it allows anti-Israeli incitement to be taught in its hundreds of schools, fact check true, and some of its staff collaborate with Hamas, fact check true. The Trump administration suspended funding to the agency in 2018, but US President Joe Biden restored it. Supporters of the agency have claimed that the allegations against aim to diminish the long-festering refugee issue and called the cut in funding collective punishment. Yeah, right. Last week, UNRWA's Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini said he would appoint an independent entity to look into the claims, both what is true or untrue and what is politically motivated. He also said the accusations were hurting the agency's already strained operations amid the humanitarian crisis caused by the war. There are today 558 refugee camps where UNRWA operates in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Unlike most war refugees around the world, the agency recognizes the refugees descendant of those displaced in 1948 amid Israel's war of independence, regardless of the circumstances. Critics allege this has fostered and encouraged decades-long culture of dependence and victimhood of Palestinians. Fact true. On Monday, a spokesperson for the agency said that if funding is not restored, it will not be able to continue operations in Gaza and across the region beyond the end of February. What sort of operations? Germany said in response that UNRWA is not the only source of humanitarian aid for Palestinians and that other venues can be explored. True. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza said that more than 26,000 people have been killed since the start of the war in Gaza, though these figures cannot be independently verified and are believed to include both civilians and Hamas members killed in Gaza, including a consequence of terror groups' own rocket misfires. The IEF says it has killed over 9,000 terror operatives in Gaza, in addition to some 1,000 terrorists inside Israel on October 7th. The United Nations estimates that more than 85% of Gaza's 2.3 million residents have been displaced as a result of the intensive group operation and aerial bombardment carried out by Israel, which vowed to eradicate Hamas from Gaza at the end of its 16-year rule. As the war has pressed on, forcing civilians to move further and further south, people have become increasingly reliant on the humanitarian aid provided by UNRWA, and many more have had to make their new homes inside shelters operated by the UN agency. Hold on. So this is exactly the game that's being played here. Uh, yeah, the UNRWA was its founding was mostly shelled for by the Soviet bloc to be founded, and of course from that moment on, the Palestinians owing historic debt to the Soviet Union. Uh, that's what also people like Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Liberation Organization came from. They were wholly supported as much as possible through the UN and the rest of the Western countries being sold this story that oh yeah, more poor refugees, Israel doing bad things. Uh, they didn't exactly verify this. Plus, they also had their own share of dumb people around them, whispering in their ears, yeah, probably it's a good thing. It's the Christian thing to do. At least if you're not going to do something for them, at least fund this agency in order to support them. And several years later, this happened. And it's not just what happens now, but now is the most egregious example of what went on. Mm, Because again, every charitable institution within the UN is grifting in one way or another, and it's grifting egregious amounts of money. Take for example, what they call Amnesty International. Is a great example. Just look at how much the CEO is paid, what service the CEO has, and realistically, about 10% of the money that Amnesty International receives from donations during the entire year actually go towards charitable measures. There's nothing wrong about that. There are a lot of NGOs who are grifting money just because the opportunity is there. But uh, but at least if you do such a thing, you keep your trap shut. Thou shall not become a hypocrite and say that you advocate for you advocate for these ex people who are facing increasing hardship or outright lying, saying things like, "Oh yeah, the Palestinians are being genocided," when when the certain institution is the one that's a significant part of the problem. Sure, the UNRWA may not have put directly weapons in the hands of the Palestinians or Hamas, but they sure did help foster the sentiment that led to the radicalism of Hamas. And this is something pretty easy that you can find as well if by any chance you know Arabic. But if you don't know Arabic, there are translated videos of manuals that have been that that have been taken from UNRWA schools, and the things that you read there are absolutely shocking. You see things like Mahmoud Abbas being called the hero of the Palestinian people. You have entire chapters demonizing Israel. This accusation that the UNRWA fostered the radicalism, they're actually very true, and they haven't been doing this in the past few years. They've been doing it for at least over 20 years there. Plus with the with the absolute lack of oversight, because yeah, who realistically gives a shit about the UN? Uh, the- this is exactly the situation that we ended up into. The UNRWA with no oversight whatsoever, and you employ some random Italian at its leadership, who definitely probably went if he ever went to if he ever went to Israel in those areas, if he would have gone, just for media photo shoots, but not exactly to look properly into what exactly is being done there, not actually carry a non-biased translator with him, so not so you don't you're not gonna get a Palestinian to do the translation for you, and definitely not a Palestinian from your own agency to do the translation. Uh, what a shocker! Things have gotten so bad. Uh, not to mention the huge number of people who swallow up the statistics that are being put forward by Hamas themselves. Of course, Hamas will skew the statistics in their favor. Of course, that Hamas is entrenched so deeply is entrenched so deeply that with the tacit approval of the Palestinian people, uh, you, you see overall how this entire shitstorm between the Palestinian and Israeli is being perpetuated. The you have schools which pretty much function both as radicalization centers, but at the same time ammo dumps for the said radicals. But then when that said school gets bombed into oblivion, as it should be, suddenly Hamas, of course, and the rest of the useful idiots that are Palestinians start chanting and yelling through their own channels that oh yeah, see these evil Israelis uh, bombarded the school, and they killed this many people, and they killed this many children. Oy vey, genocide. No, it isn't. Uh, no, no, it isn't. But as long as there are enough useful idiots on this planet who cannot do their own independent verification, or at least not even have the goal to ask a person who knows better than they do what exactly is going on there, even though that person may come with a biased opinion, but even if he or she may have their own personal bias, at least they will be more upfront with the information than simply swallowing it from mass media or straight from Hamas, because this is why these protests that have been going on in the West pro-Palestine mostly are also like that, because there are massive useful idiots, and those useful idiots that got turned into useful idiots pro Hamas and pro-Palestine, because other institutions at their own time did haven't done the part of filtering what information they actually disseminate. Easy as that. And yeah, and you can see dishonesty. The Palestinians are the only people on the planet uh, where even their descendants are considered victims and refugees by the UN by the UN after 1948. Are we remembering now what exactly happened in 1948 when the state of Israel got founded in 1948? Of course, the already radicalized Palestinians living there who were radicalized by the Germans. Uh, no, it's not just the Palestinians that started the war. There were five countries that started the war against Israel. Israel, they barely did not even get 8 months of existence, and already a five-sided war started against them. So, simply put, and little by little, each country that was part of that original war realized that yeah, probably the Israelis have a point, not only about the existence of the state, but also a point about the Palestinians. That's the reason why, as I mentioned in the second article, reading about what Nancy Pelosi said about the pro-Palestinian refugees. Uh, uh, why Jordan is not accepting any more refugees and is completely sick of this discussion. Why Lebanon doesn't exactly have an opinion about this because they've been subverted into oblivion by other larger forces out of their own stupidity. And Egypt is closed. It's keeping its Egypt is keeping its borders shut because they know what's going to happen after having seen the aforementioned examples. And Syria is a country which is in its own shit pile. The bigger issue for the Palestinians is that even other countries who are sympathetic to them, but they were not outright for them, are also turning away. And here I mean, and by here I mean the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia in particular. So Saudi Arabia. In the last few months in autumn lost a significant economic deal with Israel because of what Hamas began, and at the same time, if they take the side of Israel, that's a very politically dangerous move, not just for Mohammed bin Salman because but also in the grander scheme of things in the Middle East, because he would actually give legitimacy to Iran and its allies. Yeah, and you're here with this shit pile. Overall, what I hope is that all these people will be punished. I've already had my not exactly my doubts, but initially started being doubts, and then they turned to be uncertainties. Uh, starting 2009. In 2009, there was a border skirmish that lasted for about 6 or 7 months, if I remember. But I remember it clearly because that's the only thing that I was seeing on Al Jazeera back then. Uh, and that was back then still Al Jazeera English. In the moment when I could watch Al Jazeera Arabic, things went completely different. But getting back to the point, with Al Jazeera English showing about 6 months per day, one dude and one woman sitting on the other side of the fence, either outside of Gaza or outside Gaza City itself, and then the said city is getting bombarded by the Israeli Air Force or by Israeli artillery. I was just paying attention at what exactly were the issues. Well, that one began mm, because yeah, we're talking about 2009. That it it was it still took a long time for Israel to get the Iron Dome system. So whenever the Hamas was shooting mortar shells across the border or rockets welded up in some underground warehouses, that still would have been that still was something serious, but it wasn't as serious in order to warrant a proportional response. As it is what's happening right now. But Israel couldn't have been inactive towards having cities like Ashkelon getting bombed indiscriminately from across another side, and worse so. I'm just bringing back the example of what happened with the water pipes that the EU funded and installed in Gaza back in 2018 or 2019. They got dug up because they used the Palestinian labor. All Palestinians who worked on that project knew where the pipes were. They dug them up, they cut them up, and then they converted the set pipes into rockets. These are the people. What you want to make with that information, that's up to you. Continuing with that region and its madmen, the national UAE. Red Sea shipping diversions expected to continue for the first half of 2014. Major carriers will not resume transits through Suez Canal until risk of attack falls, says maritime consultancy Drewry. Container ships are unlikely to resume transits via the Suez Canal for at least the first 6 months of 2024, as major carriers will only return to the key trade waterway when the risk of attacks on commercial vessels has subsided, according to the maritime consultancy Drewry. Carriers appear to be working on resuming journeys through the Suez Canal within this year, though the duration of the Red Sea shipping crisis is difficult to predict, the London-based consultancy said, citing polls and discussions with its clients. The consensus view is that it will be within months rather than the full year, and certainly not within weeks. Simon Heaney, senior manager at Drewry's Container Research Unit, said in a webinar on Tuesday. Many vessels are avoiding the Red Sea route because of attacks by Houthi rebel groups on merchant shipping, opting instead to sail the longer route around South Africa's Cape of Good Hope. The number of container ship transits through the Suez Canal in the first 3 weeks of 2024 is down 70% year on year, according to Drewry data. Meanwhile, the Cape of Good Hope transits have jumped 218% during the period. Spot rates for transporting a 40-foot container from Asia to Europe through the Suez Canal have surged to more than 300% since the attacks began in November, according to Drewry. Carriers are implementing surcharges of $500 to $2,500 per container to reroute ships, the consultancy said. Diverting via the Cape of Good Hope is creating supply chain problems and delays for shippers. Estimated transit times from Asia to key destinations in Northern Europe are up 32% to 40 days compared to the shorter transit time via the Suez Canal, according to Drewry. In the next 5 weeks, on the Asia to North Europe trade route, there will be 34 cancelled sailings out of 145 scheduled ships, Philip Damas, managing director of the Drewry Group, said. However, there are already indications that the elevated spot rates from Asia to Europe are softening, Mr. Damas added. If the Suez Canal diversions end by the second quarter of this year, then the average east-west shipping rates could decline by more than 10% in 2024 compared to 2023, he said. Okay. So yeah, not a surprise. We're witnessing another Suez crisis. It's been several decades since this has happened again. But what's the most shocking part of it is that this time compared to the last time, this time things could actually be done. But the larger powers that be, especially the ones who should take in consideration the significant knock-on effects that this crisis will have, they don't exactly care as much as they should. Uh, I understand from the perspective of the US that their intention is always to de-escalate, particularly because in the current scenario, the leadership at Washington is not exactly too solid. It's an electoral year. It's going to be a difficult one. Uh, but here at the same time, I personally don't understand what exactly China is doing for this respect, because even they are affected by this thing. If the cargo takes significantly longer because ships will have to travel thousands of kilometers more than what they normally do for the Suez Canal, that will also affect them by not making them as competitive as they are from a cost of purchase point of view. Not to mention when it comes to not mention when it comes to transportation costs. Sure, the global warming can't come any sooner to open up an Arctic corridor for cargo ships, but this is a situation that we're in. Uh, uh, China could definitely exert its influence over Iran, and at least Iran could try to de-escalate the situation in the Red Sea, because the situation in the Red Sea doesn't piss off just the clients, just the clients in Europe, but it also pisses off other parties here. For example, Egypt. Egypt several days ago had a very adamant moment to consider their own military intervention in Yemen, because Egypt is the one that's is a country that's winning a lot of money in transit fees from the cargo ships across the Suez Canal. And Egypt is not exactly in a financially sound situation these days. They kind of need the money that they make uh, from those transit fees. At the same time, the port of Jeddah from Saudi Arabia is also very upset about the situation, because they're essentially screwed. They don't exactly import too much via Europe, but they're still affected by the fact that they cannot exactly get anything from Asia for that port, because you have some morons south of the border who are suddenly screwing up global cargo trade. But Saudi wouldn't go again into Yemen for this reason, because they have bigger issues. They have bigger issues at hand. Plus the operation of the coalition in Yemen hasn't exactly been too successful. Uh, uh, yeah, you kind of have an island of control with the Aden governorate, but what about the rest of the country? The rest of the country is the problem. Not even, no, not exactly the area that you still can exert influence upon. And with those guys being locked themselves in the situation they're in, and plus having quite a disastrous performance during the Yemen war. What exactly can you do? The truth of the matter is, uh, uh, no, normally what should have been done with these people, even if you were to play in the hoodies' hands and say, well, yeah, but they decided to shoot missiles in order to not let cargo get to Israel. Okay, sure, but what about the rest of the ships? It's not that they just messed around with ships that went to Israel. They messed around with ships because they have absolutely no idea how to distinguish properly. And there are certain maritime rules that exist for centuries. For example, in such circumstances, it's possible for a ship to change the flag in order to not be identified as a as a said country. Plus, Israel has a pretty easy way to avoid to avoid getting cargo through its southern port. You simply swallow up the situation as it is, and you reroute the ships around Africa, go through Gibraltar, and then it gets to a Mediterranean port. But once the hoodies started shooting at random cargo boats, and the most recent thing they shot at an oil tanker, and oil tankers being quite huge, being quite big things, being quite volatile things, and being quite destructive things, both from an explosive point of view, but also from an environmental point of view. Not much exactly still being done. So now looking as the things as they were, right now I'm just wondering uh, how much is enough for proper action to be taken, and by proper action, I'm pretty sure people can guess what I mean by this. First, first of all, put diplomatic pressure, put any sort of pressure on Iran as possible for them to de-escalate their lackeys in Yemen, and for those for those who cannot be controlled and and cannot in any other way be swayed in order to at least temporarily stop their stupidity in public, you blow them out into oblivion. That's it. There are no other solutions to this. If you leave things as they are, they will just get worse as they have gotten worse, because this thing hasn't been happening since yesterday. It has been happening for a few months already. Um, and this is screwing up a lot of people and interests in other nations who don't even have a stake into this. So what exactly is the fault of Norway in this entire discussion? What exactly is the fault of Finland in this discussion between and in this conflict between Yemen and Israel? Well, you could say that at least that at least the UK uh, the UK would have partially a fault into this. But speaking of the UK, and to link it up with the earlier article about how the UK doesn't have much of a military, what exactly is the UK doing? A lot of the ships that are insured on this planet, the insurance is offered by companies headquartered in London. And as we know, insurance premiums for ships are huge themselves, directly proportional to ships. Not to mention the cargo that you have to insure. But also you don't need a lot of things to blow up in the Red Sea for the said insurance companies to go belly up. There was a scenario, but I don't exactly remember when was it. I think it was in the 70s or the 80s. Uh, but the but the sh- but the shipping insurance industry was very close to collapse back then, exactly because of a sick joke like this. Uh, the Suddenly ships ended up getting attacked. I think it has something to do with Vietnam, but don't quote me on this. I'm not exactly sure. But what I actually remember when I was from what I was reading from that article is that the worldwide shipping insurance industry was very close to collapsing. Only because the insurance companies had to pay out about 10% of the premiums that they had to pay when said ships insured have had issues, particularly because of instances like these. And it appears that we're here in in a much worse situation, because here it's because right now it's obvious what the problem is, it's obvious what the solutions are, but still nothing ends up getting done. Where exactly is the Royal Navy protecting the interests of its own country and companies? Mm, Sure, the Royal Navy may not be as much as it used to be, but at least try to have an increased presence. Try to put more pressure. You are authorized to fire in instances when when ships from your own country are being targeted. Come on, we're talking here about the same country uh, where back in 1907 nearly started a war with Imperial Russia because free shipping boats got accidentally shot because of the Russian Navy stupidity. I'm referring here to the Dogger Bank incident. How the this is one clear example of how bad things have changed since then, from a country that 100 and a bit years ago was ready to start a war uh, with another imperial country that was still a significant size of the planet back then, because of free fishing trawlers. And now a lot of countries a lot of ships that are flying the banner of the UK. Doesn't matter if they're going to Israel or not. That they're being attacked, and realistically, not much is getting done. Not to mention the absolute the absolute brazen intentions of the Houthis, and how far they're left to go. They're left to their devices uh, when uh, uh, when they change their targets from the civilian cargo ships to shooting at the actual military ships that were sent there to protect said cargo ships. And I'm talking here about the attacks upon USS Carney, and also other attacks against the very few Royal Navy ships that were sent by the UK in that area to the freedom of navigation operations. Well, what exactly needs to happen in order to take proper and concrete action? Well, apparently for the current prime minister, it's much more important to ban fruity flavor vapes rather than focus on what's really important and what's really hazardous for the already slowly declining UK economy. But speaking of enough is enough, and this will be yeah, the last article. Euronews Business. Enough is enough. With $300 billion in debt, court says it's time to liquidate China's Evergrande. The world's most heavily indebted real estate developer has been ordered to undergo liquidation, but their assets don't cover their liabilities. Evergrande's Hong Kong traded shares plunged more than 20% early on Monday before they were suspended from trading after a Hong Kong court ordered the world's most heavily indebted real estate developer to undergo liquidation. The firm is the second biggest company in China's enormous property market, with $300 billion owned to banks and bondholders. A court order for a liquidation process means that the company's assets will be seized and sold off to repay its debts. But in the case of Evergrande, some investors may not see their money. According to Bloomberg, the company's assets to cover its liabilities are worth just a little over $242 billion, most of which remain in mainland China. The court decision is, however, only the beginning of a complicated process that investors are watching closely, mainly focusing on whether or not the Chinese courts will recognize Hong Kong's ruling. How did Evergrande get here? Evergrande first defaulted on its financial obligations in 2021, just over a year after Beijing clamped down on lending to property developers to cool a property bubble. The news of defaulting triggered shockwaves in the global financial markets, but restructuring plan was announced later. The attempt has failed, according to the Hong Kong court, which now has been decided to honor a petition filed earlier by investors to wind up the embattled property developer. Judge Linda Chan said it is time for the court to say enough is enough, adding that it was appropriate for the court to order Evergrande to wind up on its business given a lack of progress on the part of the company, putting forward a viable restructuring proposal as well as Evergrande's insolvency. Evergrande has not demonstrated that there is any useful purpose for the court to adjourn the petition. There is no restructuring proposal, let alone a viable proposal which has the support of the requisite majorities of the creditors, said Chan after the decision. She lambasted the company for putting out only general ideas about what it may or may not be able to put forward in the form of a restructuring proposal. The interests of creditors will be better protected if Evergrande is wound up by the court, she said. Fergus Sorin, a lawyer representing an ad hoc group of creditors, said on Monday that he was not surprised by the outcome. The company has failed to engage with us. There has been a history of last-minute engagements which has gone nowhere, he said. Sorin said that his team worked in good faith during the negotiations. Evergrande only has itself to blame for being wound up, he said. Evergrande could appeal the ruling. What does the court decision mean for Evergrande? The Hong Kong court liquidation order does not necessarily mean that Evergrande will go bust and collapse. Evergrande CEO Sean Siu told Chinese news outlet 24/21 Xingji that the company feels utmost regret at the liquidation order. He emphasized that the order affects only the Hong Kong-listed China Evergrande unit. The group's domestic and overseas unit are independent legal entities, he said. Siu said that Evergrande will strive to continue smooth operations and deliver properties to buyers. If affected, we will still make every effort to ensure the smooth advancement of risk resolution and asset disposal, and we will still make every effort to advance all work fairly and in accordance with the law, he said. The 21 Jingji article appeared to be briefly taken down on Monday afternoon, but was republished shortly afterwards. It's unclear how the liquidation order will affect China's financial system. It's also unclear how the liquidation order will affect Evergrande's vast operations in the Chinese mainland. As a former British colony, Hong Kong operates under a legal system that is separate from, though increasingly influenced, by communist-ruled China's. In some cases, mainland courts have recognized bankruptcy rulings in Hong Kong, but analysts say Evergrande is something of a test case. How might such a collapse impact European businesses? Experts have previously told Euronews Business that the Chinese property market has been serving as the engine of the global economy, emphasizing that along with all the sectors supporting it, the real estate market in the world's biggest economy is worth $100 trillion, a staggering 6 times of China's $18 trillion economy. Global financial markets, while rattled earlier by fears of Evergrande liquidation, could cause global shockwaves. However, Chinese regulators say the risk could be contained. Only a few $billion of Evergrande's debt was owed to foreign creditors. Evergrande Group is one of the biggest Chinese developers that have collapsed since 2020 under official pressure to rein in surging debt that the ruling Communist Party believes will worsen China's slowing economic growth. Real estate drove China's economic boom, but developers borrowed heavily as they turned the cities into forests of apartment and office towers. That has helped to push total corporate, government, and household debt to the equivalent of more than 300% of annual economic output, unusually high for a middle-income country. If the Chinese property market plunges into turmoil over the difficulties of Evergrande, there could be a knock-on effect which could put real estate projects as far as London at risk, as many have Chinese investors financing them. On the other hand, the European Central Bank said earlier that European banks have no significant exposure to Evergrande, and any collapse could have a limited impact on European markets. However, the ECB said in a report that tensions in large corporate sectors, such as the real estate sector, could be transmitted to the rest of the Chinese economy, for instance, through households whose wealth is significantly exposed to the real estate market. A potential collapse could therefore drag household consumption in the country, where major global brands saw their future profits skyrocketing from Apple to LVMH after they heavily invested in the market in the last decade. Many European companies are directly exposed to any shock or default in the Chinese property market, including the Ashmore Group, a UK investment manager specializing in emerging markets, holding upwards of $500 million of Evergrande bonds. So getting back to a prediction that was put on the sofa years before, it was predicted that that some sort of collapse will happen to Chinese Evergrande Group, and the reason is pretty simple. It's absolutely bonkers, and the real estate market in itself in China is absolutely bonkers, and frauds are omnipresent in this in this post-truth world that we live in, and at the same time in this world where fundamentals of a business no longer matter, and the fundamentals don't exactly matter even in a state capitalist country like communist China. Such things were inevitable, and even if in this scenario uh, it's a possibility, and the article is right that that this liquidation ordered by a Hong Kong court will be a test case for mainland China if they approve it or not. And this could have significant repercussions to the real estate market in China, because if mainland China says that Hong Kong that the liquidation is right, then Evergrande as we know it is over. But at the same time, if the CCP lets China Evergrande go under, they go under along with everything they invested in, and especially they're gonna screw over all the people that they were meant to build houses and apartment blocks for, and which they never built. Kind reminder, the main big reason why China Evergrande is in this shit pile of a situation is that initially they started they said property development, but what they did is that investments already paid for by their future owners. Uh, the the said money has been put into other investments, while for the investments that they were meant to build and they were not yet built, they took loans. They took from all sorts of shadow banking institutions in China, if not from the CCP directly. So yeah, well, once the CCP realized that this is a completely toxic system, which is affecting their real economic development, uh, they suddenly wanted to pull the plug on it. But when you pull the plug on such a thing, it's not like China Evergrande or any other companies uh, that that function pretty much the same way as China Evergrande does. Simply they did not adapt to the situation. They thought they thought that the show will just go on, and right now there's a possibility that the show must go on as well, because if getting back to what I said earlier, it will be very hazardous from a perceptive point of view for CCP to let China Evergrande go under, because if they go under, that means people will not get their houses, and if they're not going to get their houses, the houses that are already very expensive by any country on these global standards, particularly when you look at the incomes of Chinese people. Uh, where are they going to go? Sure, you can leave a bunch of people with their eyes in the sun. Well, this is what happened. You're not gonna get your money back. We're not gonna fund it back. There is no money. Screw it. Fuck it. But when it comes to China Evergrande, that's something that could legitimately be called a bit from the perspective of CCP, something too big to fail, or no, not exactly too big to fail because it can fail. Sure, it can be led to fail, but that puts the CCP in a dangerous position, and I'm not exactly sure that the CCP wants to put itself in a dangerous position. Considering all the things that happened in the past in the past few years. Why exactly do you think that that the CCP is doing within the mainland absolutely anything that they can in order to prop up the homegrown economy? It's because things are bad. The outside world isn't buying as much as they used to. Whoever the significant number of companies that have factories in China moved somewhere else because the pandemic the saw the risks of putting all your eggs in one basket. But at the same time, mm, but at the same time, the China still being China, also having growing animosities with other critical players on the globe. Why do you think Xi Jinping went to San Francisco several weeks ago to meet with Joe Biden and other industry members? It's because sanctions such as the one related to chip manufacturing is something that really hurts China. And if it was let to go like that, if it was let to go like that, uh, and the dear leader wouldn't have went to the US to negotiate something else, the chances of an implosion of the CCP would have been dramatically higher, and that's exactly what is meant to be avoided. What is meant to be avoided for the sake of the self-preservation of the party. So it remains to be seen. Uh, this is a situation of heads you fail, tails you lose. Mm, but I definitely wouldn't want to be the the lackey of Xi Jinping, who is taking the decision of what to do in this moment, whether to agree with the Hong Kong court or to not agree with the Hong Kong court. Both can be done, but both come with equally hazardous consequences. It's just a matter of if either one happens, what exactly are you going to do as a substitute to at least prevent some of the downfall happening. On the other side, with the liquidation of China Evergrande and the companies, especially from the Western world, who unironically think investing in China is a good thing. From this perspective, I am actually glad uh, that things ended up happening like that. Simply because the, just like how the US learned their lesson in the 1920s and the 1930s, that investing in the USSR was a horrible idea. It appears that said lesson has been forgotten by the US and the rest of the planet with the emergence of communist China. But worse so, the US and the West has encouraged the growth of China, and now China has grown so big, and you've grown so reliant. Well, what exactly are you going to do in this circumstance? In the circumstance, you've perpetuated for so many decades a system, and you sold essentially the well-being of your the well-being of your country for cheap t-shirts. That's kind of it. That's kind of it. Can anybody conceive in this current world uh, to have the things that you have right now, but without China? It's impossible. Mm, it's impossible. There are still way too many things done in China, and there are many things which are still made in China because they're cheap. Imagine, just, just imagine how horrendous will it be. Will it be, say, for example, a laptop, just like this one, and well, at least this one is made in Taiwan, but but a lot of materials to make this laptop uh, come from China. Where do you think the PCB boards are the most cheaply printed? In China, not in Taiwan. Uh, take for example smartphones. Well, which are used by so many people, and they are such an unhealthy thing to do. But everybody kind of got sucked into using one more or less. Would the current world today accept a smartphone to cost twice or three times as much? I don't think so. That will upset a lot of people, and these are just two singular examples. There are so many things there are so many things that we have in our houses made in China, and the vast majority of people buy stuff made in China because because things are done in China cheaply. The economic argument most of the times it's one that way. To look for example, look as a good example of a thing that everybody has in their house, and what it used to cost back then and what it costs right now. Microwaves. Microwaves, but before they used to be, before most of them were used to be made in China. Say, for example, a Panasonic microwave. Panasonic microwave made in Japan would cost to this day. So the same microwave would cost three times as much as it used to, as you would to this day, simply because it's not made in China. Sure, from another perspective, that could actually be advantageous because the the quality of manufacturing in Japan is something different. That's why you still have quite a surprising number of people who still have technology from late 80s or early 90s still in their houses, while they're still perfectly functional. While these days, if a lot of things, if they survive and they still function without a critical failure 2 or 3 years after its warranty has expired, it's actually a moment to be jubilant about. Well, that's exactly the things that I'm talking about. People have kind of gotten too used with this current status quo, and in order to shake out the status quo, because the status quo is something that's not only unsustainable, but it's also dangerous. And it is what it is in the end. Mm, If you, but apparently for now, still the argument with people want cheap T-shirts instead of everything else, it still works. For how long, nobody knows. It remains to be seen. Well, this is as much as it can be done for the first episode of the Victor News Network. From what I see, based on my calculation, there will be about 3 hours of content worth watching. Well, I just want to remind you to subscribe, give this podcast to your friends if there are any people interested. To reiterate, if you have any suggestions and other things worth proposing in the comment section on send to the email thehonestjew1@gmail.com, or write to me directly on Twitter. So what can I say? This is about it. Have a good rest of the week, and see you soon.